unmanageable?
Well, a couple of things. I'm not sure that I think that the gap between what people want and what they're getting is wide, but I'm not sure that it's widening. I mean, the election of Trump was certainly a call for more action against mass migration.
Yes.
And since he's been elected, the border has been pretty much closed. There have been deportations. There have been, certainly the rhetorical stance of the administration is against migration. I mean, Trump may disappoint his voters on other things, but on that one thing, which I think we agree is like a really central issue, actually the will of the people and the actions of the government have kind of converged.
I agree with that.
If there were to be, as I've just described, a conservative government in England, and it abolished the Human Rights Act, which would allow Britain to act in a fully sovereign way, then the way would be wide open to deporting people who did not have the right to be there, and certainly to stopping the ongoing traffic of small boat migration in England. So I think I think it is, I think it's possible things are getting better from a democratic point of view. You also said, okay, so at what point does this explode? I'm not sure it does, because one of the things that makes things explode is discontent in numerous and dynamic classes. And that's why, the Arab world was so unruly throughout the 1980s and the 1990s, because this was a part of the world in which people were having like 6 or 8 or 10 kids, and there was no place to put these young men. And there was a lot of martial dynamism in these societies. And in fact, wherever you have a lot of young people, if you look at the United States in the 60s and 70s, you have a lot of disorder and rebellion. But we're not societies like that anymore. We are top-heavy societies full of old, wobbly people. And these are not the kind of societies that say, darn it, I've had enough. These are people who need, the demographic heart of our societies is in people who are of an age where they need care, not where they're going to run out into the street shaking their fists.
So most of what the big health companies sell is loaded with sugar and fillers and synthetic junk. It's probably not too good for you. And that's why we're interested in a company called Peak. It's a modern wellness brand that is actually healthy. It's got clean, science-backed methods, all kinds of blends, trusted by doctors, loved by experts. It supports gut health, glowing skin, steady energy, not peaks and valleys, and it makes it really easy for you to feel good all day long at your best. One of our favorites is RE Fountain. It's a calming electrolyte designed to help your body recharge and recover overnight. It's got magnesium, no sugar at all, no artificial sweeteners, no fake flavors, and it gives your body what you need to hydrate and restore overnight, which is good. Everyone here has felt the difference: better sleep, more energy, smoother mornings. It has helped a lot of people here, and it can help you too. You get 20% off for life when you start your first month. Go to peaklife.com/Tucker, peak, P-I-Q-U-E, life.com/Tucker. Highly recommend it. When the children of the latest wave of migrants to the United States are 18, so that'll be in 15 years, then you're going to have a really dynamic society. You're going to have a lot of people born in this country to immigrant parents who feel like they want a piece of it, and you're going to have massive change, wouldn't you think?
Absolutely. And that, I think, that's why I've tended to look at this, what's happening now with arguments over the border and with Trump as part of a process that will come to resemble, about a century later, the process that led to the New Deal. I mean, because I think the New Deal was a was the consolidation of a new governing system in a way that took account of the waves of migration that had changed the country between 1880 and 1920. We look at our present demographic change and we say, oh my goodness, things are really, what country has ever faced anything like this? And it's really, there really is there are really a lot of points of contact between what has happened with us and what happened to the country between 1880 and 1920. You have, people from, the initial argument is, look, it's all well and good to receive people, but this country is about a certain set of values. It's about, it's historically determined. These people who are coming know nothing of our country. How are they going to ever, assimilate into it? It's exactly the same arguments that you got in the 1880s, 1890s. Then you get demands for, like closing the border. And it just doesn't happen and doesn't happen and doesn't happen until 1924, when it suddenly happens. And then suddenly the only people who can come here are the people who are already here. Let's see, the only Americans are the ones who've already arrived. Those are the only foreigners. And that's why, if you look at it, it's why there are so many Italians in Argentina. Right. They came after 1924, when the Italians could no longer go to New York. And so from there, these people had no choice but to mix together into a new kind of American. And the people who said these people will never be able to adapt to the old American ways, they were wrong, but they weren't totally wrong. I mean, they sort of like the country did change to reflect the identity of the new immigrants. And then in 1932, when Roosevelt came to power, on the heels of an event that discredited the old elites, which is the crash, then he claimed the authority to basically reorganize the country in the name of this new mix of the settled Americans and the new immigrant Americans. And it knit the country into one people so effectively that by the 1950s and 60s, young Americans were sort of like complaining about how boring and homogenized the United States was. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so it can be done.
Will there, after Trump leaves in 3 years, will there be like a series of Trumps, or will the party revert to what it was?
Will the Republican Party revert to what it was before Trump? First of all, I think Trump is such an unusual person that I don't think he can really be replicated, even if, no matter how hard anyone tries. He came to prominence because he had an incredible amount of, what used to be called brass at a time when brass was what was required. There are other people who have sort of who seem to have more of the qualifications that a politician would require. That is like patience and like an understanding of policy and things like that. You had people like Ron DeSantis seem to be offering that to the Republican Party for a while, but it's not what the country felt it needed. The country felt it needed brass. The country felt it needed someone to come in and insult, topple, and break the old establishment.
Was that establishment broken, like after Trump?
Well, it's still in progress. I mean, this is something you know a lot more about than I do, but I mean, if I look at Trump 1, I would say that it was an almost utter failure on Trump's own terms. That is, he used that list that Leonard Leo and others had given him to to fortify the Supreme Court as a more or less conservative force, and he nominated a lot of judges. But I don't think that he ever understood where the actual levers of power in the government were. And so the same deep state that he had complained about was as strong on the day he left office as it was on the day that he arrived. And so one had the impression that he'd learned absolutely nothing. And so what has happened under Trump too is one of the most astonishing surprises in the history of American politics. Now, in Brexit, you had a guy who was kind of a genius in the workings of British government named Dominic Cummings, who was able to say, well, no, you don't need to win a majority in Parliament on this one. You just need to control the cabinet office, etc. Trump never had such a person, but apparently, and the details are still not clear how, apparently he acquired one or several in the course of his 4 years out of power. I think Steve Bannon is correct to say that the 4 years out of power were in Trumpian terms were a great blessing for him. So there's someone, I mean, maybe Steve Miller is a candidate for this, who has the most tremendous Machiavellian understanding of what can be done inside government. I mean, the speed with which USAID was dismantled, which in what seems to me, it was not really a cost-saving operation. It was like a purge of a certain tendency in government. Was really, whatever you think of it as an ideological operation, it was a tremendously expert operation in terms of government rejiggering. The executive orders that he has, canceled, and the new ones that he has passed in order to give a new reading to affirmative action. And I would say that that affirmative action was in many ways the key institution of American government of the last half century. To render it inoperative, even if he hasn't fully killed it, is a constitutional revolution. So, yeah, things are still in progress. It's very difficult to see whether an operation like, say, deportations, whether that is going to accelerate or whether Trump is really running out of gas and this is going to, but it's hard to see how it will proceed from here. But it's been a huge change. He's turned out to be a very significant president.
Can you go back a second? How was affirmative action the key institution in American government?
Well, I've always thought, and we've talked about this, that the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was it created a new constitution that was really at odds, a de facto new constitution that was at odds with what we thought of as our real constitution. And as, what it basically tried to do was sort of like create a society in the South where, blacks could live as equal citizens to whites, in public and in large companies and that sort of thing. But it wound up being an incredibly versatile tool. You could use it for anything. Once you had declared a sort of national emergency. So like getting women onto, like corporate boards or getting, bilingual education into schools, getting, protecting, transgender story hour. I mean, it just ramified into every corner of American life. And anybody could be made. Anybody was under suspicion. And let's just say in corporation, it worked publicly and privately. In corporations, anyone who ran a company that was larger than a few dozen people was understood to be under the government's watchful eye. You could avoid being sued really only by establishing an affirmative action program. And so it became the means through which the government could approach any institution, public or private, and saying, we'd like to have a look at your hiring practices. We'd like to have a look at how you've been behaving for the last year in your board meetings. We'd like to know if there's anyone you're hiring who has kind of an animus against Black people or women or gays or immigrants. And so it had a very chilling effect at every level of government and at every level of society.
Is that over?
It is for now, except we now have a culture in which for 50 years, people, even in the most private, conversations, sort of have been trained to ask themselves, can I say this, or is this okay, or I'm not homophobic, but and so you have a society that has really been trained to be scared. So a lot of this, yes, I think so. So I think that institutionally it's over, but culturally we are really not a people that has sort of learned to use freedom, and that will take a long time. It'll take a long time to get an easy freedom of conversation back.
About things, obvious things that you notice, differences between people and differences between groups.
About anything.
About anything.
Almost anything. Yeah.
Do you see that changing? I see it changing.
Do you see it changing?
Yes, I do.
That's interesting. Yeah.
It feels like the term racist has lost its sting, almost completely.
Yeah. I would expect that to happen. I haven't really gathered any evidence about it. I mean, for one thing, it's harder to, sue a person when the government has announced that it's not enforcing affirmative action, that kind of thing. So, I mean, it used to be that if you could just successfully attach the word racist to a person, whether through a lawsuit or a public relations campaign, no one could hire him. Do you know what I mean? It was a real.
Oh, I do know what you mean.
And it was sort of it was not as different from the Chinese social credit system, which we liked to deplore, as we like to think.
And that is no longer true?
Yes, I think that is no longer true. I think it's no longer true that institutionally you can destroy a person with that kind of imputation. However, it may become true again, depending on what happens in the next election. So people are wary. And I also think that we're not the sort of people that is comfortable going out on a limb anymore. We've become a very conversationally cautious people, or at least anyone who's lived the last several decades in this country. You acquire habits. I mean, I think that you can't expect a person who's had these very self-protective habits beaten into him over decades to give them up, in the same way that, people who lived through the Depression maintained their habits of frugality for 60 years after that.
Yeah. I remember when banks introduced ATM cards, they couldn't get people who grew up during the Depression to use them.
Well, that's a very good analogy.
Because it was just too spooky,
Yeah.
Do you remember a country where people spoke freely in conversation? Do you have memories of that?
I remember one where people spoke more freely. I remember, and in fact, I went to college in the 1980s. I think it was pretty free. And actually, when people describe the first really mention in the wider public of so-called political correctness was, I think, in the winter of 1990 to 1991.
Yes.
And shortly thereafter, you had the Clarence Thomas hearings for the Supreme Court, which introduced the idea of sexual harassment. And I got the feeling that things were changing very quickly right then. There were a couple of incidents then, and one that I remember very clearly was there was a Dodgers, an executive for the Los Angeles Dodgers named Al Campanis,
yes,
who got invited on Ted Koppel's show Nightline to talk about Jackie Robinson 40 years after he'd entered the big leagues, and Al Campanis had been he was not only was he not a racist, he had been Jackie Robinson's roommate, and he was one of his defenders. He was great, but he said a few things kind of the wrong way, like he gave a wrong answer to the question of why aren't more blacks managers, and he was ruined. He was ruined. This is a guy who had fought to bring Jackie Robinson into the major leagues. But I mean, you had, he lost his job. And I remember Maxine Waters, who was already I don't think she was yet in Congress actually, but she was very active in California politics already. So she wanted to be sure that he wasn't, secretly being given any benefits by the Dodgers of any kind. And I mean, he was just destroyed. This kindly old man who had been a friend of Jackie Robinson's. And it was clearly something was happening there. And I think that what was happening is that these enforcement possibilities, which are in the Civil Rights Act, that lawyers were getting more adept at using them for a growing number of things, like saying, well, of course you have freedom of speech, but if you say that in the company you own, you will create a hostile environment for your employees, and therefore they'll be able to sue you for this much money. So basically, without banning speech, you were able to make speech very uncomfortable for people.
Did that just play out? Is it just impossible for people to live this way forever and people just decided?
No, it didn't play out. It had to be rebelled against. And the removal, the lifting of the executive orders that order affirmative action by Trump was an absolutely necessary step. The decision not to enforce affirmative action was a necessary step. By the way, it was preceded by a Supreme Court case that appeared in its mealy-mouthed way to say negative things about affirmative action programs in universities, but it's clear that universities were proceeding as best they could to maintain it. So no, it does not play out. It's this affirmative action, political correctness, woke, this whole constellation of authoritarian and even totalitarian seeming rules. They are rules. They are not part of the culture. They are not the result of, a lot of people deciding we really ought to be nicer to trans people. They are enforced by the fact that if you fall afoul of these of civil rights laws, it can cost you your business and your reputation and everything else.
What's the real purpose of them? I sense that social justice is not actually the goal.
Well, I should add that this is just let's deal with this. I think that solving the age-old race problem in the United States was the original goal of civil rights.
Yes.
But the tools that were given to solve that problem included ways to overturn democratically made decisions in the South. That tool, that ability to circumvent a democratic mandate from the American people, from any people, is such a valuable thing for politicians to have. And so they started using it for everything. As I say, underrepresentation of women, underrepresentation of immigrants, underrepresentation of Hispanics, all these things become crises. And social justice actually was the name that was given to this. But it was always, and you can call it anything you want, but it always was a way of using the government to sort of order society. And the danger of it was that you could do that at a really, really micro level. I mean, you can do it at the level of like what signs people hang in the doors of their shops, and so it became kind of like the world that, Václav Havel describes in his, and that's why everyone started reading Václav Havel and Alexander Solzhenitsyn again, because our society felt like those Eastern European societies at the time of communism.
It was Soviet. It was totalitarian. Yeah. I mean, in the strict sense, it was
that's right.
Total control over people's lives.
Yeah. I like to draw the distinction that Hannah Arendt does at one point. A lot of people use totalitarianism to mean like a really, Mussolini originally used it to mean, like the state can be all competent. And a lot of people in our time use it to mean like a really, really, really bad dictatorship. But the way Hannah Arendt uses it means like the state gets into the totality of your
exactly
of your life.
It doesn't have to be violent.
There's no nook of your life that where the state does not belong. The state wants to be at your dinner table. You know what I mean? And listening in on you. The state wants to be, on your route to work and make sure, the state wants to be everywhere with you in everything you do.
Can we go back to that? So you said that this was not organic. The population never cried out for total control of its personal conversations or anything else. Mm-hmm. It was imposed on the population by the state. Now it's been rolled back by the state,
right? Run
by Donald Trump. But can it be reimposed? Would people could President Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez be like, my goal as president is going to be to eliminate racism? Wouldn't people just laugh at her?
Yes, but there might be a confrontation. I mean, as long as Trump hasn't, removed these laws from the books, which he hasn't, he's merely sort of like suspended the enforcement of them, and he's unwritten some executive orders which can be reissued. I mean, it's a reprieve. So the interesting thing would be what would happen if, how would the public respond with, 4 years of living more freely if those freedoms were suddenly withdrawn? And this includes, you mentioned young people. This includes people, who've never had any experience of having politically correct censorship at work or that sort of thing. And I don't know.
You were saying last night at dinner that people often say the Democratic Party, when it takes power again, as it will at some point, will be a lot more radical. But you were saying maybe that's not correct.
I don't know what they will have the capacity to do. You say, well, how will people respond if President Ocasio-Cortez says, we're going to have, affirmative action and drag queen story hour again. I just don't know. But I do think the Democratic Party is probably going to, it's going to find something to, some way to radicalize.
At what point do economic debates like reemerge? I notice as we've been talking about drag queen story hour and race and sexuality and all this stuff, there's been, in a way that would have been weird 40 years ago, but almost no conversation of like macroeconomics in public. Like all the oxygen's taken up by the political correctness stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a very welcome thing that economics is coming back. You hear a bit of it when we talk about the tariffs. But Trump has really confounded a lot of the categories. I think that everyone has the habit of like saying, talking about tax cuts for the rich and all that kind of thing. To tie this to what we've been saying with immigration. Immigration is a very important part of this economic question. An interesting thing about Trump's first term is that as best we can measure it, it was a highly egalitarian period. And, we really only have accurate, undistorted numbers for the first 3 years of it because the final year of it was COVID. But it really appeared that the bottom quintile of earners advanced against other quintiles for the first time since the 20th century. And
Really?
Yes. And this is in the Fed's numbers that came out towards the end of the Trump administration. If you look at total economic performance, like the way we tend to measure it, okay? We tend to measure it by the mean, that is the GDP per capita. Economic performance was much better, or it was better under the Obama administration than it was under Trump. The economy grew more. However, if you look at the distribution of it, there were far lower gains for the very rich under Trump. But there were relative gains there were absolute gains, let us say, for the people in the lower quintiles. I think the 4 bottom quintiles did quite well under Trump.
So his voters benefited, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Okay. So it's hard to say why that happened. I think immigration did go down, but mostly immigration was talked down. Okay. When you have high immigration is like a direct transfer payment from those who compete with immigrants to those who use immigrants, but
that's interesting. So immigration really is a transfer of wealth to the rich.
Yeah. So when we talk about Trump and immigration, that's I think an important thing to keep in mind. And that is why a lot of people were really surprised by the shift in votes particularly among Black and Hispanic males to Trump in 2024. And people have sought to explain it through these cultural, factors that we've been discussing earlier today. Oh, it was Trump's, endorsement by this rap hip hop star or whatever. Exactly. But I think it might just be that people at that part of the economy, who tend to be, that benefited from Trump won, tend to be disproportionately Black and Hispanic. And it might just be a case of people just devoting their direct economic interests.
It's a little weird if you go through the Congressional Black Caucus, certainly among the people whose names you've heard, like the famous Black political leaders in this country, they're all for open borders.
Huh. Well, I think that is largely intersectionality. And, people talk about people in in universities talk about intersectionality like it's a theory about, how, different types of lack of privilege intersect. Like, am I more discriminated against because I'm a black woman or because I'm a lesbian and that kind of thing, or because I'm foreign or whatever. But actually, what intersectionality is, you've used the term on your show, but what I think it really is just coalition building. The civil rights regime created a system in which you could do almost anything you wanted. A minority could do almost anything that he wanted with government. You could do almost anything you wanted with government in the name of minorities, but minorities remained minorities. You couldn't get the majority to do that. So what happens is minorities the beneficiaries of minority government wind up making an alliance. You can't vote against immigration because you're a woman, and women's rights are immigrant rights, and immigrant rights are human rights, and human rights are gay rights, and they're all wrapped up together. So, and that's where the much mocked non sequiturs of intersectionality come from, like gays for Gaza and that kind of thing.
It's my favorite.
So,
but really, you're just describing the Democratic Party. This is just like a theoretical overlay to justify retroactively a coalition.
The Democratic Party is the party of the beneficiaries of the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
The Democratic Party is the party of beneficiaries of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Yes. And the Republican Party is the party of the victims of the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Or those who have objections to it if you count among the victims, those who feel their liberties constrained by it. Yeah.
I would say curtailing someone's liberty is to hurt somebody.
Okay. Yeah.
Interesting. Does that change?
Well, as I say, I think it's in abeyance now. But if I could say another thing about immigration and the economy, there is a kind of a longer term process sort of working itself out as we create this, through border enforcement, a tightening of the labor market on the bottom of the income distribution. It should do some very good things for the country. If you believe, as I think you probably should believe, that inequality is one of the biggest problems confronting the country, it's going to alleviate that somewhat. But it's going to do it in a way that is going to hurt in places. I think people are right. I think those economists who say that immigration, that curtailing immigration is inflationary, are right. And it's inflationary in a lot of ways that affect not just the upper middle class, but also the middle class lifestyle, like the great proliferation of really nice restaurants. The idea that, when this experiment in mass immigration in a nearly open border, with Mexico began in the 1970s, there weren't a dozen sushi restaurants in Pittsburgh. People didn't. There
were no sushi restaurants in Pittsburgh.
This stuff, we tend to think that these amenities have developed because of our, improving taste, that we're just so much more discerning than our parents were. But the difference, I think, is this source of just plentiful, bountiful, really cheap labor for people who can work in back kitchens and things like that. So
when I worked in a restaurant as a dishwasher 40 years ago this summer, it was a diner in New England. Everyone was white in the kitchen. Mm-hmm. Everyone had a criminal record. Everyone was white.
That's interesting. But so when you tighten up that labor market, and suddenly you have to pay your dishwasher $1 more, $2 more, $3 more, the meals in your restaurant are going to get more expensive. So there aren't going to be, like sandwiches, gourmet sandwiches for $11.99 anymore. They're going to be like $28.99, and people are going to say, I'm going to bring my sandwich to work. I'm going to, and then the restaurant is going to close, and the country is going to become much more like it was, like what you saw the tail end of in your diner in New England. It's going to have crummier food. It's going to have, there's going to be a lot more sameness. That's what the world of a low immigration, less free market, where there's less of a free market in labor. That's what a society like that looks like. The working class gets richer. They move towards the middle. Everyone gravitates towards the middle class, right? And economic institutions begin to serve the middle class. That is, you have a shrinking of gourmet restaurants and a concentration of restaurants in the middle of the road category.
So the middle class was the dominant, portion of the country. Was the majority middle class country up until I think 2015. And did that change? And then the middle class is no longer the majority. Is that because of immigration?
Has a lot to do with immigration. Yes, globalization and immigration. And I think people tend not to mention immigration. People tend to say it's a mix of globalization, that is free trade, and technology. But I think that the most important part of globalization is immigration.
Why is it the most important? I mean, it has affected the most changes?
George Borjas, the Harvard economist, has said that, immigration, people always talk about, is immigration good for the economy or bad for the economy? And basically, whenever you measure it, it's tough to get an effect on the economy that's more than like 1%. It's so trivial. But what the huge effect is, which is like dozens of times larger than the effect on the economy as a whole, is the transfer effect. The sort of loss of jobs by people who need $15 an hour to wash dishes to those who will do it for $8 an hour, okay? And the benefit to people who used to be paying their gardener, $30 an hour, but now find it can be done for $6 an hour. Or more likely, they pay a guy who's got a team on his truck and they pay him, $30 an hour and let him sort out how this is done. And he does it much quicker and they save money. You see what I mean?
I do.
So it becomes a transfer from the working class.
So it doesn't necessarily, I think what you're saying is it doesn't necessarily expand your economy, but it just makes the rich richer.
I think so.
So that would explain why rich people, these are broad strokes, but in general, hate any conversation about immigration, immediately go to motive, you're a racist, and just aren't at all interested in talking about it at all. And why working class people really resent it. There may be other reasons too, but that seems like a big reason.
Yes, those are broad strokes, but I think they're roughly accurate. There's there's a French sociologist named Christophe Guillouis who's written books about how this has worked in France, and his thinking has really clarified mine on this. But, you basically in France, you have 20 cities that are like nodes of the global economy. And they like in Toulouse, you have Airbus, and where there are engineers and executives at Airbus, they have, African gardeners and there are nannies and there are all sorts of people there. It's a global economy niche. When you get out into the countryside, none of that stuff touches anything. It's basically the economy consists of like returning, cans to the grocery store. This explains why, if you live in a place like Washington, D.C. or Berkeley, California, and or Boston, people are like sincerely puzzled. They say like, how did Trump win? I don't know anyone who voted for him, and they'll say something like, no, really, I've talked to people of all classes. I didn't vote for him. My mother didn't vote for him. My nanny, from Jamaica didn't, who's not naturalized and didn't vote. She didn't vote for him. And the answer is the dividing line is not between rich and poor. It's between the beneficiaries of and the excluded from the global economy, right? That's the dividing line in the politics.
So when you give up open borders, you're really giving up like a whole way of life.
You give up the solidarity between classes in your country.
Huh. What does that mean?
I don't know. As soon as I said it, I realized that what you could look at it in a different way. I mean, you give up a dynamic that brings the classes close together, which is that the ability of working class people to withhold their labor for more money.
Right.
You know what I mean? You undercut that. They become, it's why trade unions, when they were actual industrial unions and not arms of the Democratic Party,
right.
were, they equated immigrant labor with scab labor. That was
well,
what
they were behind the immigration restrictions of the 1920s.
So you give up that dynamic, but it's very tempting, there are other ways to look at it, but yeah, I think that's basically the best way to look at it.
Will China ever decide, as its economy matures and cools inevitably, that it needs mass immigration to China?
I don't know much about China. I know a little more about Japanese. China has had a tremendous amount of internal labor migration,
yes.
which is just about to come to the end of, and so its labor costs are going to rise. I don't know how it's going to react. It's very interesting that Japan has chosen, a tightening economy over a diversifying society. That is, they've kept out immigrant labor for the most part, and where they've admitted it, they've tended to do it on a temporary basis. You get a few Filipino nannies, and they send them home at the end of their term.
The only mass migration they've had in the last 100 years has been from Korea, which they controlled until 1945, and then the Koreans who stayed kind of pretend they're Japanese.
Yes. So I think that. And
how's that trade worked for them?
I think it's worked well for them. I mean, I think it's worked for them. I mean, the United States is constantly, the United States has brought tremendous pressure on Japan to admit immigrants. And this is one of the things that I find, this is one of the things I find quite mysterious. But if you look at the pressure that this is one of the things that I think that USAID did. It's sort of an ideological arm of the country. But if you look at not just programs, but people in the United States diplomatic corps in the State Department were always sort of like browbeating Viktor Orban in Europe, for instance, for not being more welcoming of immigrants. But so I think we're at the point now where we're in a moment of transition, but I Japan is deeply in debt. I believe they have the largest per capita debt in the world, although it is all to themselves, so it's debt to the, so it should be workable, but there's still a Japan. And, as we've discussed, Japan decided that it valued its cultural continuity more than European countries did. And so Japan, if you go there, you'll discover it's still, I think, the Japan that people who went there 20 or 30 years ago remember it as.
So they seem like the only smart country like in the world, because that does seem No one's starving in Japan. Actually, Japan is infinitely nicer than New York, for example. Sorry. And Tokyo is. And even though it's bigger and more crowded.
Yeah.
I just wonder, like, is that, like, that just seems like the greatest win to me.
They think so because they continue to keep this policy, and there's not a lot of agitation for changing it, you know. But I don't know. It's been a few years since I've been there.
Last question: are you hopeful about the United States?
Yeah, but I'm not sure that's saying much. I tend to want to be hopeful, and the United States has some tremendous strengths. You know, it's got the United States something has happened since I'm using Europe, which I think is the best, frame of comparison here. The United States has got a lot richer than Europe in the last 15 years. I don't know why that's happened. The two societies seem to be converging up until, roughly the time of the financial crisis of 2008, and then the Euro crisis that followed it. And since then, the United States has peeled away by 20 or 25% from European standards of living. So it's richer. It seems to be in a period of democratic ebullition. I mean, that is the populace is engaged. This doesn't mean that, they've made a right choice with Donald Trump or that he's always going to do the right thing. But the public is kind of vigilant, and it is reforming the country, and we've reformed before, so I'm relatively optimistic.
I am too, and you make me feel optimistic.
Oh.
Christopher Caldwell, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tucker.
So it turns out that YouTube is suppressing this show. On one level, that's not surprising. That's what they do. But on another level, it's shocking. With everything that's going on in the world right now, all the change taking place in our economy and our politics, with the wars we're on the cusp of fighting right now, Google has decided you should have less information rather than more. And that is totally wrong. It's immoral. What can you do about it? Well, we could whine about it. That's a waste of time. We're not in charge of Google. Or we could find a way around it, a way that you could actually get information that is true, not intentionally deceptive. The way to do that on YouTube, we think, is to subscribe to our channel. Subscribe. Hit the little bell icon to be notified when we upload and share this video. That way you'll have a much higher chance of hearing actual news and information. So we hope that you'll do that. So I think for most Americans, sort of news about South Africa ended in 1994. Both literally, we stopped getting a lot of news from the country, but also people's views about it stopped evolving then. That was the year that apartheid ended, I guess, officially. You had elections. Nelson Mandela is still a hero in the United States, often referred to by politicians. And it's only been, I think, in American media in the past couple of months that stories have come out of South Africa that a lot of Americans have read, that actually the country seems to be falling apart and that the government is kind of genocidally racist.
Yeah.
And then President Trump in the past month has basically said the same thing. And it's shocking to a lot of people, I think, how bad it is and how racist it is, far more than apartheid ever was. And so I'm wondering, since you've just landed from South Africa, you live there, describe the state of the country right now, if you would.
Yeah, well, perhaps I can start with your reference about the 90s, because it's absolutely true. South Africa and America was very involved with the setting up of the political system that we have in South Africa during the 90s. And it was, of course, the end of history era. Everyone is excited about the fall of the Berlin Wall and the whole world's going to be liberal and democratic, including African countries.
Yes.
And Samuel Huntington actually cautioned against this in 1996, saying, when he wrote The Clash of Civilizations, and he said, don't expect of African leaders and African liberation movements to suddenly become Western when you give them Western constitutions, because they are still African. So they will it's the democratic paradox. They will use democratic institutions to promote non-democratic ends. And that's what we see in South Africa. We have a parliament, we have a very liberal constitution. But if you read the constitution and you compare that to reality in South Africa, it's two completely different worlds. The de facto and the de jure reality in South Africa is irreconcilable. And so what has been happening in South Africa is, firstly, there was this major excitement about the new South Africa, Nelson Mandela, the miracle story. Oprah spoke about this, and Charlize Theron, and everyone. But the reality on ground level was in many ways the opposite. And I think a lot
from the beginning?
Gradually. So they started, for example, with these BEE, as they call it. It's Black Economic Empowerment, which of course has nothing to do with economic empowerment. They started with that in 1996. And so they actually said initially in the 90s that that's the ruling party's strategy. They still call it that, the National Democratic Revolution, which is about using democracy to promote socialist ends. And so the revolution, they say, goes in two phases. The first phase is present yourself as being liberal and democratic and get support, especially international support and local, and then use multi-party democracy as a way of promoting the goals of taking the country down the road to socialism. And so recently they even went as far as publishing a document saying, we are now ready for the second phase of the revolution. We now have power. We have control of the state. We now need to use this to become much more aggressive in our socialist policies. And we're seeing this in a plethora of new laws all of a sudden in South Africa, which I think it's gotten to the point where it's just not possible to maintain the view that people have had of South Africa for the last few decades and look at what's currently happening in South Africa. It's two completely different worlds. And hopefully, or happily at least, a lot of people are starting to wake up to this.
So, you said Samuel Huntington wrote that in 1996, 2 years after the election. I kind of thought that from day one, simply because I knew people there, and I was more familiar with the details of the Mandelas.
Yes.
But I think most Americans, I don't think, had any idea. Like, what was Nelson Mandela on Robben Island for? What was he in prison for?
Well, if
for being black, or was there another reason?
Well, literally. So I have children, and they are taught in schools, and the government prescribes what children should learn in history. And so the official version is he went to prison because he was a good leader, and the government didn't like that. I should say that he certainly was the best that the ANC has ever had to offer.
Yes.
But the reason why he went to prison is because they started Umkhonto we Sizwe, which was the military wing of the ANC. Which became involved with military actions in South Africa with an attempt to overthrow the government. And they actually, and this is I'm quoting from the ANC's own policy documents that's on their own website. So they had this operation when they started, which was used in the Rivonia trial against Nelson Mandela. It was a strategy called Operation Mayibuye. And the slogan of this operation was, shamelessly we shall attack the weak, and shamelessly we shall flee from the strong. So those were the circumstances in the 1960s.
Pretty noble policy statement there. We'll attack the weak and flee from the strong.
Yeah, and it's still on their website. You can find it there. So that was an attempt at an armed uprising. Now, we can talk about everything that was wrong with the previous political system in South Africa, and there was a lot wrong. But it's simply not the case that he went to prison for being a good leader.
Well, I think that most people would acknowledge a distinction between military action, which is, a fight, a war, a battle between militaries, and attacks on civilians, which is something we call terrorism.
Yes. So in 1985, the ANC had a conference in Kabwe in Zambia, and they took a formal decision that in their so-called military operations, they would not differentiate between hard and soft targets. So it was officially a policy that says we can kill innocent people. And a lot of innocent people died in the political violence in the run-up to 1994, and 90% of the people who died were black South Africans.
Right.
It was...
but non-combatants, women, children.
Yeah, women and children.
Passers-by, people had nothing to do with anything.
Yes, especially.
And so during that time that Mandela was in prison, I'm 55, so I remember this very, very well. His wife was effectively his spokesman, Winnie Mandela.
Yeah.
And she was lionized in the United States. She was a hero. She was the mother of an emerging nation, a woman of peace and decency, really a transcendent figure, a holy figure. And then it turned out that actually she was a murderer who had, burned to death or supervised the murder of a bunch of different people. Tell us about that.
Yes. So let me firstly say that I have a lot of respect for Nelson Mandela. I think in terms of his efforts and as I say, I think he's the best the ANC has ever had to offer. Winnie Mandela, his wife, not so much. So she's been involved with a lot of things, including what was called the Mandela Football Club.
Yes.
Which was a gang that was involved with violence and killings of innocent people. And she famously said at a political rally, with our necklaces and our matches, we will liberate this country.
Yes.
Which, of course, is a reference to the necklace murders, which was very popular in South Africa and still happens in South Africa. That's when you take a rubber tire, you fill it with petrol or gasoline, and you put it around someone's neck so that it's bound around their arms, and you set it on fire. And then you stone that person while he's burning to death. And that happened. There were, I think, 500 or 700 people were killed like that during political violence in South Africa. And she encouraged this. Initially, she denied it, and then it came out that it was recorded of her saying this. So yes, it's very bizarre that someone like Winnie Mandela is a hero today.
And was a hero then. And so that, to me, was a sign that these are not, liberators of their oppressors.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but no one in the West wanted to think that. It was like a really simple tale of white oppression of noble black people. And by definition, the black people, there were oppressed black people, of course. And there were noble black people, but the leadership always struck me as evil.
Yes. So there were some better and some worse people in the leadership. I think an important component here that is very well documented, it's not a secret, but a lot of people don't seem to want to know this or recognize this, is the very strong alliance that the ANC has always had and still has with the South African Communist Party, and the extent to which they were supported not just by the Soviet Union, also by the Vietnamese and by Mao Zedong as well, implementing what they call the People's War strategy that they got from Mao Zedong. So yes, it was very much the ANC saw themselves as being the African or South African frontier of promoting a socialist or a communist revolution.
So how did it turn out?
Well, if you mean in terms of where we are today.
Let's just follow different threads. So let's just start with, technology and infrastructure. What did in 1993? South Africa was famously the most prosperous society in Africa by far, right? And among the most prosperous in the world, correct? They had nuclear weapons in South Africa.
Yes.
Yeah. What is it like now, 30 years later?
Well, the reality is that virtually every sphere of society is collapsing, with the exception of taxation, of course, and tax collection. That's still very, very efficient. Maybe I can explain it this way. So America has a somewhat skewed tax system with, if my information is correct, about 85% of income tax in America is paid by about 10% of the people.
I think that's correct.
So 1 in 10. In South Africa, 85% of income tax is paid by 1 in 30 people. So it's a very small number of people, a very small portion of society that pays tax, that is heavily taxed. And then about almost half of the population in South Africa get money from the government in the form of social grants. If you add government employees, conservative estimates say that 50% of people in South Africa get money from the government. Some estimates say it's up to 60% of adults, voting age adults, get money from the government each year. So then this money, of course, is then used. It's given out as social grants, but what's left is used to set up these programs that are actively discriminating against taxpayers. There are so many examples. One of the most recent ones is this Blacks Only Fund that the government has set up, whereby they give money to black entrepreneurs exclusively. So this is happening. And then on top of that, so after you spend your tax money to fund these government programs that are discriminating against you, you have to spend what is left to do the things that the government was supposed to be doing. So the classical definition of a government is that it should protect life, liberty, and property. The classical liberal view, we're a bit Ciceronian, so we think a government has to do more than that. But if we use those three things, the government's not protecting our lives. There's about, if this interview that we're about to have is 2 hours, there will be about 7 murders in South Africa in this time. Government does not protect liberty. It's actively targeting schools of minority communities, actively denying the identity and the rights of minority communities. And it's certainly not protecting property. It's actively involved with the program to empower the government to expropriate private property without compensation. And then we have to use the money that is left to pay for our own private security, to become involved with organizations, to fulfill the things that the government was supposed to be doing with the tax money that we paid in the first place.
One of the reasons that I find this story so fascinating is not simply because, it's like the classical, irony of history. This, group comes in with one aim and then achieves exactly the opposite. We're going to have we're going to end racism and then make racism much worse. But also because they have gone about it in a way that's almost like American. The same language, the same diversity
absolutely.
is our strength, kind of sloganeering. And it's had the same result, which is to basically kill whites. And I mean, that's just true.
Mm.
And I wonder if you see that. It's almost like you imported our kind of intellectual class framework for this project.
No, that's absolutely the case. So there's a theory. There was this video that just went viral on social media of this guy talking about how white people are subhuman and all of that. And they get, this is taught at universities in South Africa. There's a theory called Azania critical theory. Azania is a Pan-African word for South Africa. And they actually get this from Americans like Robin DiAngelo, who's this Ibrahim X. Kendi, Ta-Nehisi Coates, these people. They get it from them, and then they put an African flavor on it, which essentially boils down to a theory that justifies the targeting and extermination of the white minority. And so the theory, to summarize, goes more or less like this. There's an African term called Ubuntu, which means brotherliness, or it's about your internal humanity. It's a Zulu term. And the theory goes that white people are incapable of having Ubuntu. But Ubuntu is the essence of humanity. So if you don't have it, you're not truly human. So it boils down, the logical conclusion is that if you kill a white person, then you did not actually commit murder. So this is not widely believed in South Africa, but this is taught at universities by university professors, and it's certainly believed by radical elements.
It's a predicate for genocide. I mean, it's always the same in we're watching in parts of the world now. They're not fully human, right? So we can kill them because they're fully human. Then it's of course a grave sin to kill them.
Yeah, well, we've always been saying that there's not a genocide in South Africa. Looking at what happened in Rwanda and so forth, it's not the same thing. But it is very alarming to look at some of these claims that are being made and to compare that to what was made in Rwanda.
Every country, and genocide broadly defined, an attempt to eliminate a group of people on the basis of their race or ethnicity.
Yeah, and we have these political parties chanting, I mean, you've seen this, you've reported on this, chanting kill the Boer, kill the farmer to a stadium filled with people. And it's not just rhetoric, so they would say, no, it's just a metaphor. But it's preceded by a speech about how white people are criminals and should be treated like criminals, how everything they have is illegitimate and stolen, in which people are encouraged to go and invade their farms and so forth. And then they chant, kill the Boer, kill the farmer, and they make these hand gestures. Of course, the Boer is a reference to the Afrikaner people. But the reality is also that the farmers are being attacked and killed on their farms. So it's not just a metaphor. And our attempts at researching this has found that there's an increase in farm attacks when the political climate becomes heated or warmer, and these type of statements are made in a way that's highly publicized. You do get an increase in farm attacks, and it's very brutal and very horrific farm attacks that we see.
So the farm attacks are attacks against white farmers,
not exclusively white farmers, but it's attacks against farmers in South Africa, of which the majority is white.
Right. Okay. So this has been going on a long time. I think it's been well documented. I believe you wrote a book about it,
Yes.
which has become very sold a lot of copies on Amazon, I noticed.
Yes.
And so none of this is like a secret, and all of it's verifiable because, dead people are pretty easy to track because they're dead.
Yeah,
So
we have the names of the people who've been murdered.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in the United States, the country that inspired the revolution that you're living through, our media have ignored that and then gone beyond ignoring it to attack anyone who brings it up as a, quote, white supremacist.
Yeah, well, I could tell you so many stories about this. So
Please do.
For example, I was on your show a few years ago to talk about the farm murders and the extent to which we were attacked by American media as a result of that. I had someone from CNN come see me in my office in Pretoria and to interview me about farm attacks. And the entire interview was about you. So he would put things to me and say, did you know Tucker Carlson said the following? Do you agree with this statement? And did you know that Donald Trump said this? And are you comfortable with this? And so I paused him at one stage and I said, what are we doing? I thought we were here to talk about farm murders and what's happening in South Africa. But the argument was that because Trump made that comment about farm murders in 2018, it has to be a non-existing issue because Trump is a liar and everything he says is false. And the same with you, because you spoke about it, that means that the problem doesn't exist. And we have to prove that it doesn't exist in order to get to you.
Well, not only doesn't it exist, you're not allowed to complain about it existing.
Yes. Yes.
It's somehow a moral crime to notice and to not like it when people are murdered for the color of their skin.
It's bizarre. It's
well, it's not bizarre. They're telegraphing genocidal intent when they're telling you, no, you're not getting killed, and yes, it's a good thing that you are.
Yes, and no, you're not getting killed.
What are they saying?
Yeah, it's no, you're not getting killed, and if you are, you deserve it.
Right.
Because of a variety of things, because the attackers are poor, or because remember all the horrible things that white people have done in South Africa and outside of South Africa. So there's always a justification. And so another example, just in 2018, again, after you spoke about this and after Trump spoke about this, the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, came to America and he spoke at an event in New York. And he said, there are no killings of farmers in South Africa. And he just flat out denied the existence of the problem. And he said this on an international platform. He said, it's not happening. It's not true. And the worst of it all was how the media knew this was wrong, especially mainstream media in South Africa. They knew that it's not true. And so they immediately rushed to his defense, writing articles like, this is what he actually meant to say. And then they sort of justify what's happening. And so we really do sometimes feel that our biggest battle is not primarily against what the government is doing, but against how the media is reporting.
But just consider this. I mean, if Tutsis in Kilgallee in 1994 said, boy, a lot of us seem to be getting hacked to death by machetes, and reporters or political figures said, shut up, you're a Tutsi supremacist for saying so, I think we could fairly say the people shouting them down are pro-genocide of Tutsis.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the other explanation? I don't really get it. I mean, what's the other explanation?
Well, the explanation that is used in court cases. So, by the way, this Kill the Boer chant was found in court not to be hate speech, according to South African law.
It's not hate speech. Yeah. Killing people is not hate speech.
Yeah, chanting about killing people.
You know why it's not hate speech? Because it's not speech they hate. That's why.
Well, maybe that's
speech
it.
They approve of.
So the arguments that is used or are used to defend this type of rhetoric would always be something like, you need to see it in context. You need to remember the apartheid system. You need to remember what these people went through.
That they deserve to be killed. You need to remember that.
Yeah, so the argument is that they're actually commemorating the historic struggle, and that's why they are still chanting this today.
I would disagree with you. I think what they're saying is the people getting murdered deserve to be murdered, so stop complaining about it.
Yeah, well, a few people are saying that out loud, but there does seem to be the sentiment.
Look, at some point, I don't need you to explain your motive if I have a clear glimpse of your actions. If I know what you're doing, I don't have to hear you explain why you're doing it. I already know because the motive is displayed in the action. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
So in other words, if I pull out a gun and shoot you and somebody said, did you not like Ernst?
Yeah.
I can say whatever I want, but I just shot you. So I think it's kind of fair to infer that I didn't like you.
Yeah,
right?
But the motive is also explained in the words. So they're trying to defend the words. Right. It's the famous story of Chamberlain and Churchill. When Chamberlain came back from meeting Hitler and he said, no, well, I met him and I think we're going to find peace. And then Churchill said, no, well, I read what he said and I believed him.
Yeah.
And so you can just read what they're saying. If you read the policy documents of the ruling party, they say they want to convert South Africa into a communist society. They want to have a revolution in South Africa. And if you listen to the more radical parties to the left of them, they openly chant about killing white people. So they say these things out loud. And now there are obviously more to the fringe. You find the more extreme rhetoric in South Africa, but it's very alarming and how people just rush to their defense all the time.
Permanent Washington is terrified and distraught by the Trump revolution now in progress, and it is a revolution, and it's unfolding along very familiar lines. The White House is now giving voters what they actually want and what they've wanted for a long time, and that's the one thing that Permanent Washington doesn't want to give them. They are working to stop it. Fortunately, our friends at Heritage, the Heritage Foundation in D.C., are fighting back. They've spent years thinking this through. How do you dismantle permanent D.C., the deep structures underneath everything? How do you train replacements for the bureaucrats getting canned? How do you enact policies that voters actually voted for? Well, now that Biden is gone, Heritage's vision is finally becoming reality, and you can help push it forward by going to heritage.org/Tucker and making a tax-deductible donation. Your gift fuels their American Rescue Plan and helps stop Permanent Washington from crushing it, from strangling it in the cradle. Heritage has been doing this a long time. They've been successful, and they're more aggressive now than ever. Their work is worth supporting. Go to heritage.org/Tucker to make your gift today. We hope you will. So that's the part that bothers me. Like, I'm not surprised. I'll just say it. I'm not surprised at all. I watched what happened in Rhodesia when it became Zimbabwe in 1980, and something identical happened. There was a lot of killing, and they drove it, to the bottom rank of nations, the poorest country in the world. And following exactly the same script, I always thought that would happen in South Africa. I wanted to be wrong. Turns out I wasn't. What really bothers me is that the West has allowed this and cheered it on, because I live in the West. I live in the United States. So, I don't want to think that my leaders are for killing people on the basis of race, but watching how they've stood by and applauded, Barack Obama's applauded all this stuff. Yep. It tells you everything about Barack Obama and other American leaders, doesn't it?
Yes, and this brings us back to the 90s. So during the 90s, it was, again, after the Cold War, and the world, and especially the West, was high on ideology and this idea that, the world will become liberal and everyone's going to become like us, and everyone in the world is just an American waiting to be liberated, and we just need to go and liberate them from their own traditional beliefs and so forth. And so it really is the case that America and many Western countries played a very significant role in creating the South Africa that we have today.
I'm aware.
And so we don't want other people to fix our problems on our behalf. We want to solve our own problems. But you can certainly make the case that the West has a moral responsibility towards the people in South Africa.
Of course, the West forced, through sanctions and boycotts, the change of government that put the ANC in power. So absolutely, in the same way the West has armed Ukraine, so they have an obligation to make sure,
Yep.
to at least know what's happening and to be honest about it, not to hide their own, responsibility for the crime.
Yeah, and so there's this false dichotomy in South Africa, or with regard to South Africa, that if you are against what's happening in South Africa now, that means you want the apartheid system. So you have a choice. And there's one former judge recently said this, who's retired. He said that we have a choice in South Africa between a moral system that is dysfunctional, which is the current system, or an immoral system that is a functional one, which is the former system. And so the problem is, if you criticize what's happening in South Africa now, you get accused of wanting to return to the apartheid system. But the truth is, you can reject both. You can say we don't want the apartheid system and we don't want what's happening in South Africa at the moment. We want to govern ourselves. We want freedom. But it seems that a lot of people are incapable of making that conclusion, or leaving any room for saying that both these systems are wrong and we need a better system, a system that is much more decentralized, a system in which the various nations who live in South Africa, because South Africa is very big, it's almost as big as Europe, the various nations living in South Africa should just govern themselves. And that's not what's happening in South Africa. And I think it's a worthy cause to pursue.
So I think I'm hardly an expert on South Africa at all, but I am American. So can I just give my overview of of the different groups in South Africa, and you correct me, but just so people following on, because I think it matters for the reasons I'll explain. So South Africa, they're basically two big white populations in South Africa historically. They're what were called the Boers, the Afrikaners, who were basically religious refugees.
Yes.
A mixture of Dutch and French Huguenots, Protestant Dutch, Protestant French, who moved to Southern Africa for reasons of religious liberty. Okay, and then you had the English, who I think were after the Boer War in power.
Yes.
Who mostly were there for economic reasons and had, in many cases, passports back to Great Britain. And then you had a couple of different African black groups, the largest of which I think to this day are the Zulus.
Yes.
Who, like the Afrikaners, the Boers, and the English, were not native to the area at all. They were newcomers who arrived, I think, just right before the Boers did.
Yeah, not long before.
Okay,
the
this is all
Dutch
true?
arrived. Yes.
And they, as invading groups often usually do, kind of exterminated the native population, who were what we would call the Bushmen.
Yeah, the Khoi and the San, as they are also called.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so that's my like dumb foreigner overview. Is that roughly true?
Yeah. So just can I tell you a story from our history?
I hope you will.
Yes. It's some people call it the origin story of the Afrikaner people, and it explains a lot about who we are today. So we were settled in the Cape, the proto-Afrikaners, who were still the Dutch, the French, and the Germans. We were then colonized the Cape in, I think, 1810 by the British. It was during the Napoleonic Wars.
When did the Afrikaners for the Boers first get there?
1652.
1652.
Yeah, that's 150 years before the Declaration of Independence or something.
Wow.
Something like that. Yeah. So
a long time ago.
Yeah. So my great-great-great-grandfather, Nicolaas Roots, who was the first Roots who came to South Africa, came more or less the time when George Washington was a teenager. So he was 8 years older than George Washington. So my family has been in Africa since George Washington, since the time of George Washington.
Since before the United States was a country.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Cape was...
Do you have another passport?
No. I don't. And I don't really want one.
Right. And do most Afrikaners have other passports?
No, most don't. Yeah.
Okay.
But this goes to the story I want to tell you. So we were colonized by the British, and you can call them the proto-Afrikaners. Then said, we don't want to be governed by anyone else. We want to govern ourselves, and so they opted to move into the interior of South Africa, which was called the Great Track. And they didn't know what they would expect. They said they reject slavery. They want to foster good relations with local tribes, which they did. There were many treaties signed and agreements and so forth. And then
they did not hold slaves.
There was slavery in the Cape Colony before that, but when the Great Track, that was around the time of the abolition of slavery, and they also rejected slavery. They explicitly said so. So they then went into the interior, and the leader of the Great Track was a guy called Piet Retief, who went to negotiate with the Zulu king, Dingaan. And so he said, what can we do to buy land from you for our people to live? The agreement was they had to return cattle that was stolen by another tribe with a king called Sikonyela. So they retrieved the cattle, they brought it to the Zulu king. The Zulu king, King Dingaan, said to them that we have to celebrate. So leave your weapons outside the laager, come inside, and we'll have a celebration. During the celebration, at one stage, he chanted Bulalani Abatakati, which means kill the wizards. So they took Retief and his commando, his group, to a nearby hill, and they slaughtered him. They slaughtered him last because they wanted him to see. They wanted to make sure that he sees his people and his son murdered. A few months later, before, so after that, they went on an extermination mission. They killed women and children in the laagers and so forth. A few months later...
A laager is a group of wagons pulled into a circle.
Yes, correct, yes. And so a few months later, his body was found with the treaty on which the Zulu king signed, giving them some land. So they then initiated a punishment commando, a group of 300 to 400 men to counterattack the Zulus, which eventually led to the Battle of Blood River, one of the most significant battles in our history, where they found themselves completely surrounded. They were about, let's say, 400.
Before the Boers?
Yes, surrounded by 12,000 Zulus. And so they had this wagon, and my great-great-great-great-grandfather was in that laager, and he was the religious leader. His name is Sarel Salia. So Sarel Salia...
And what was their religion?
Christian.
Dutch Reform?
Dutch Reformed, yes.
Yep.
So he said to them, listen, we need to make a vow to God. And so he wrote a vow, which they all made. And the vow said that we're standing here in front of the God in heaven and earth to make a vow to him that if he protects us in the battle that lies ahead, we will commemorate this day in the years to come as a day of thanksgiving and a Sabbath. And we will also tell our children this story, and we will build a church, and we will make sure that the honor of the victory goes to God and not to us. So they made this vow, and the battle took place. And the result was that not one of the Afrikaners were killed. 3,000 Zulus died in that battle.
Not one was killed?
Yes. Yeah. And so the reason why I'm telling this story is not to point to the Zulu people. We have good relations with the Zulu, and we've worked with them. This was, of course, the one major battle, but we've had good relations with them over the years. But it says something about, firstly, why the Afrikaner people are so patriotic. It says something about why we are so attached to African soil and why we are still religious. We're a very religious community. We have some problems in terms of belief and so forth. But broadly speaking, the Afrikaners are, compared to Europe and compared to some parts of America, still a very religious people. And it also says something about why we are so attached to the country and why we don't want to leave. We want to stay there because our ancestors have been there for hundreds of years, and we've fought and died for our space there, and we've gotten used to it to a certain extent.
Well, it's the only country that you have, isn't it?
Exactly. We don't have any other country. We can't go back to England. We're not Dutch anymore. There's this slogan in South Africa that says "Go back to Holland." But I mean, I've been to Holland. I've been to Amsterdam. It's a beautiful city, but I don't feel like I'm at home when I go there. It's a beautiful foreign city that I'm attending. We became a people in Africa, which is why we are called the Afrikaners. We named ourselves after the continent, and our language, Afrikaans, is named after the continent.
But you're being called invaders by people whose ancestors were also invaders.
Yeah, well, who came from the north of Africa, yes, from where Cameroon is and so forth, who came down firstly towards the east of Africa and then along the Great Lakes, eventually ending in South Africa, yes.
So I think it's what you said is really important, because I think from the American or the Western perspective, there's this idea that the Afrikaners, the Boers, are worse. They're the worst whites there, worse than the English.
Yes.
The English, who, by the way, created the concentration camp during the Boer War.
Yes.
Yep,
that's true.
Winston Churchill was there. And kind of behaved pretty dishonorably, I would say, on many, many levels for hundreds of years in South Africa, but that's just my opinion.
Yep.
But that the Boers are somehow the worst and that they have no right to be there. And I think history suggests something different.
Well, absolutely. So on my mother's side, I descend from the British. My great-grandfather fought in the First World War for the British. And so in many ways, culturally, we've become very close to the British because of the influence over the years. And I don't think there's friction today between the Afrikaners and the British, but it certainly is the case. I mean, the concentration camps were horrible. I recently read the Gulag Archipelago, and Solzhenitsyn writes in there that the first concentration camps were invented by the Soviets, but that's actually wrong. That the first concentration camps that we know of at least this type of concentration camps were during the Anglo-Boer War, where about 30,000 women and children died. But there was a lot of the great thing about the Anglo-Boer War was that it was in many ways a first for the world. It was, some people call it the first international propaganda war, because it was in a time when newspapers became popular. So there was this propaganda war in Europe with regard to the Boers, or the Boer War, with a lot of people saying the Boers are Boerish. That's where the word comes from. Evidently, if someone told me that's where the word Boerish comes from, it's to be sort of, very old style and not very sophisticated.
Rough, yeah.
Rough around the edges. And so there was a lot of propaganda, like the Boers being compared to wild hogs and things like that. But that's okay. The word Boer was actually used for a long time as an insult, almost like Jew, like calling someone a Jew. It's like, oh, you're a Boer, typical Boer. But I mean, we're very proud of that word. It's something that we take pride in. It's in many ways, there's some debate about the difference between Boer and Afrikaner, but it's broadly speaking synonymous. But I mean, we're very proud of our history in South Africa, and we've become a very sophisticated community with an immense treasure chest of literature, of poetry, of philosophy, all of it in our own language that we did over especially the last 100 years, which of course is under threat now.
Your language not spoken by anyone else in the world?
No, it descends from Dutch.
Yes.
And so if you spend some time as an Afrikaans person with some Dutch friends, eventually you start to follow, but it's not Dutch anymore. There's been influences by other languages and so forth. So it's there are people who speak it all over the world, but that's only because so many people have left from South Africa. Some estimates say it's about 1 million people, white people, who have left South Africa over the last few decades.
How many are left? How many whites overall in South Africa, and how many of them are Afrikaans?
So it's more or less about 5 million who are left. The Afrikaner community is about 2.7 million. Yeah, and the total population is about just over 60 million.
And now it looks like you're, as you said, entering some kind of final stage where they've been expelled from a bunch of different African countries, as you know. But it sounds like the plan is to force them to leave or kill them, or what is the plan exactly?
So Jan Smuts, the famous Boer general who worked with Churchill, also famously said that South Africa is a country where the best never happens and the worst never happens. And so we sort of believe that, and we hope that the worst outcome is an unrealistic outcome. We do know that the most important thing that we need to do now is to be very well organized in terms of our own communities, to be very well connected to each other. There's this whole debate about the individual and the community in philosophy, and we've realized that if you're just an individual, you are completely helpless. If you're not part of a community, if you're not given meaning by the community of which you are a member, you're completely helpless against the Leviathan, the state. So we need to be well organized. We need to be armed. We need to have well-functioning communities who look after look after the poor, do all the things that the government's supposed to be doing, but also look after our safety. So we drive patrols at night. We're involved with tens of thousands of volunteers involved with patrols, looking after our own safety and so forth. But I think the bigger question here is the future of South Africa. And this is a controversial thing to say, but it's so obvious that it's not sustainable. It's not going to work, and it's just getting worse. So the only possible solution is not simply to say we need a different party in power, because the underlying foundations is problematic. The only possible solution is to move toward a system with subsidiary authorities, which could imply something like a republic for the Afrikaner people. It could imply a kingdom for the Zulu people. It could imply different types of authority depending on the community. But South Africa is a country made up of a long list of minorities. If you look at it from a racial perspective, you can say there's a black majority. But the black majority also consists of a variety, as you mentioned, a variety of nations and tribes and so forth.
And plus massive immigration into your country.
Yeah, it's a very serious problem. Yeah, we virtually don't have borders in South Africa.
Right. And a problem, of course, for the country, but also a demographic fact that it's not as if there's this like monolithic black majority. There are all kinds of different components of the black majority, right?
Yes.
That don't necessarily get along.
Yeah.
There have been a lot of Zimbabweans murdered in South Africa by South Africans.
Xenophobic violence. Every now and then there's this upsurge in violence against foreigners. So they get accused. What typically happens is people come in from the north of South Africa, like Malawi, Zimbabwe, and so forth, Zambia, and so forth. And then they work and they accept jobs for lower wages. And a lot of them work really hard.
Yes.
And so that leads to friction because there's very high unemployment in South Africa already. And so it leads to friction among the local communities. And then every now and then we have this upsurge in very, very brutal xenophobic violence. So yes, the border it's virtually non-existent, the border to the north of South Africa.
If you've been paying attention, you know that ALP is not just another nicotine pouch. It is literally the best nicotine pouch in the world. And we know because we use it all day long. We've used all of them. Turns out you can actually make money by telling people about ALP. We're launching our affiliate program. If you have an audience, big or small, you can cash in. You earn 10% commission on every sale of ALP that you bring in. And to make it even easier, we'll give you a 10% off link for your followers. They save, you earn. It's really simple. By the way, compared to all the other products people sell online, ALP is truly good. It's delicious. It is easy to sell because it's heartfelt. So spread the word, get rewarded for it. Best nicotine pouch in the world.
So what would it look like to have autonomous republics? And is that allowed under your 94 Constitution? I thought there was some provision for that?
Well, it's interesting that you know this. Yes. So there's a section in the South African Constitution, Section 235, that provides for self-determination for communities. Now, there's some ambiguity in terms of how to interpret that section, but there's some constitutional provision for that. And so during the 90s, the negotiations for a new South Africa, the more conservative groups who were white and black, who were arguing for self-determination, were made fun of by the ruling party at the time, the National Party, and the ANC, of course, and also some Westerners. This is just backwards. This idea of governing yourself is somehow an old, ancient thing that we should move away from. And part of the problem, part of the reason why they were made fun of is the question is, how do you do that practically? And the only way to practically do that is to have areas where people live concentrated, where people form a de facto majority. And there are such areas, like, for example, when you talk about the Zulus and so forth, the Afrikaner people are pretty much dispersed, although there are some areas where we live more concentrated. But there's, for example, there are some initiatives to get Afrikaners to move closer together. And I think that's a solution that we need to really focus on, is getting the Afrikaners to move closer together.
So they're clustered in Pretoria, was my understanding.
The majority, yes. Pretoria, and then the Western Cape, and the south of the country. And then there's this Orania initiative in the Northern Cape.
So tell us about that. What is Orania?
So Orania is a cultural community. It's an Afrikaner cultural community. It's fairly small. It's about 3,000 people, but it's growing rapidly. It's growing by about 12 to 15% per year. And the idea is it's a culture. It's privately owned. It's a community where the Afrikaner culture can survive and flourish. And it has been growing at quite a pace, even though it's from a small base. But the idea is to say this is an area where we are the majority, and we make our own decisions. We make our own laws. We govern ourselves. We make our own decisions in terms of what happens with our tax money, what happens with our streets, what type of monuments.
Do you murder other people or oppress other people?
No.
Then why? Maybe you have an answer to this. A neighborhood, a community of 3,000 people, which is tiny, even by South African standards, has received unrelenting negative media attention in the West. Why is that such a moral crime, such an outrage to have a community like that?
Yeah, it's bizarre the extent to which Orania has been attacked, especially in the international media. So I spoke with a friend in Europe recently who said to me, I've only read negative things about Orania, but that's why I like it. Because I know who's writing it.
A lot of us have reached that conclusion.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so in South Africa, there are many traditional...
The lying is just, can I just pause and just say, the lying is unsustainable. When you open up the New York Times and it's a safe bet that whatever they're telling you is the opposite of the truth, then you've reached a point where it's like, why even have media coverage at that point? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So in South Africa, there are many cultural communities, like Zulu communities, different. Let's say there are many black cultural communities, and when they are reported on by the media, they would say this Zulu cultural community so-and-so, or this Xhosa cultural community is doing this. But when it's Orania, they say it's a whites-only enclave. That's the term they use, even though it's a cultural community. So black communities can have that.
What is that? Why the hostility? And that's true globally, by the way. There's no any white majority country. There are very few left. But there's just suspect because they exist. What is that?
I think it's underpinned by oikophobia, this idea of just hating your own people and wanting your own people to
It is strange.
Down.
I'm not mad at China for being 99% Chinese or whatever. I'm not mad at Burundi for being all black. It just never even enters my mind. What is that? Why is that? I mean, honestly, I guess now we can ask questions like this.
Yeah,
do you have any idea?
I honestly think it's underpinned by an enormous sense of guilt within Western society or the Western world, not knowing how to make sense of the Second World War, and being influenced over decades and centuries by enlightened philosophy that talks about how you are the problem and how you should have a sense of guilt for who you are, and the idea that community and identity is a bad thing. But it's not a bad thing if it's someone else.
Not only is it not a bad thing, it's required by law. Community and identity, I mean, those are like the buzzwords of the moment.
Yes.
But those are, I mean, basically it's just like everyone hates whites, including a lot of whites, and I just don't understand that. I am white, but I'm kind of
Yeah.
agnostic on the question. I kind of like all people. I think they're all created by God. But we're required to pretend this isn't happening, but it is happening. Everybody hates the whites and wants them to die. Where does that come from?
I think it's primarily a Western thing.
What's the root of it? I think it's the weirdest thing I've ever seen.
Yes.
And by the way, if everyone wanted Malaysians to die or something, I would say, whoa. You know, whatever Malaysia has done through the years, like you can't attack people on the basis of their Malaysianness. That's just wrong. I would say that, and I would mean it too.
Yes.
But it's considered a crime to say that about whites. Like, where does that come from? I'm honestly baffled. Do you have any idea?
Well, no, I can only speculate. I think some part of this oikophobia, I honestly think Enlightenment philosophy has played a big role in this. I think the influence of, ideas about power structures and all these stuff that's coming from America. It used to come from Europe.
But the Chinese have an awful lot of power in Asia, and I never hear anybody say you should it's outrageous that China's 95% Han or something. It's not even a thing. It's something about as they say in our universities, whiteness is uniquely offensive.
Yes.
It's uniquely, and I don't think that's a product of Enlightenment philosophy because, this is a new thing. This is post-war. The Second World War did this in some way that I don't fully understand. I don't understand at all, actually.
I think so. Alasdair MacIntyre has an explanation of how to make sense of how we derailed in trying to make sense of the Second World War. I mean, obviously, Hitler was evil and all of that. I mean, no one disagrees with that.
Obviously.
But so the wrong lesson from the Second World War is that nationalism is evil, or a sense of pride in your identity is evil. And there are a lot of people who would really like us to believe this, that we need to abolish communal identities. MacIntyre's line...
Only when they're white.
Yes. Yeah, of course.
It's actually, I don't think anyone thought the lesson of the war was that nationalism is evil, only that nationalism when whites do it.
Yeah, when whites do it, yeah. So MacIntyre's line is that a sense of communal identity and pursuing what is good for your people is a good. And what went wrong with the Second World War was that Hitler was trying to pursue this good at the expense of all other goods. He was detaching this one thing from everything else. And you cannot do that without committing evil and inflicting evil. And so I think it's a bizarre situation where we are in currently, but...
So I thought and think that the lesson of the Second World War was that targeting people for violence and discrimination, but especially violence on the basis of their immutable genetic characteristics was wrong. That's what I was taught.
It's inherently evil.
Then. I believe that now as much as I've ever believed it. But it's just crazy to see people say that on the one hand, and then for a lot of people, a lot of our leaders, the lesson of the Second World War was, no, that's good.
Yeah.
Actually, you need to target more people on the basis of their immutable ethnic characteristics, their whiteness, and kill them. Like, that's the lesson? No, that's the opposite lesson, right?
Yeah, of course. Well, so in South Africa, and this is part of the bizarre part of it, is the ruling party in South Africa, they would write in their own policy documents. They say our ideology is a blend of race, nationalism, and socialism. That's literally what Nazi means. Now, I'm not saying they're Nazis, but in some sense, they're calling themselves Nazis. If they say we promote a combination of race, nationalism, and socialism.
Yeah, I don't think people can hear themselves. I mean, I think even this conversation will be like, oh, that's a Nazi conversation. It's like, no. We're arguing, or I'll speak for myself, I'm arguing against what I thought the core idea was, or the core bad idea in the Second World War, which is that you should attack people, hurt people because of how they were born. I'm just
based on who they are.
Always been opposed to that. I will always be opposed to that. But now it's like complaining about it makes, I don't know, it's all so...
You're not even allowed to say this has to stop.
It's also fake. Yeah. Like, it's actually, this is all a cover for something much more sinister that is not really related to the Second World War. Like, I just don't think, because it doesn't make any sense. As an intellectual exercise, you just like immediately hit a brick wall.
Yep.
Like, what you're saying is nonsensical, right?
Yeah, well, it's difficult to make sense of it because it's completely irrational.
It's completely irrational. Therefore, I think it's a lie. Because it doesn't even, like, I don't have a especially high IQ, and it's super obvious to me that it doesn't make any sense. So, like, what really, I guess there's no answer. I don't know the answer, but there's something very deep going on here where the leaders of every country in the world all of a sudden decide this one ethnic group needs to be killed. Like, what?
Well, I think one part of it is something that you've said before, which is affluence. The people in the Western world have become very affluent, and unfortunately, as a result of that, very self-centered, and in many ways, they've become disconnected from their communities, disconnected from their tradition and so forth.
There's no doubt about that. But I mean, I just spent a lot of time in the Gulf, in the Persian Gulf, the most affluent countries in the world per capita, I think. I mean, they are. And, whatever you think of them, you don't see a lot of Arab leaders being like, we're too Arab. That's the problem, where I hate myself for my Arabness. Like, that doesn't even occur to them. Yeah. To their great credit, by the way. I don't think self-hatred's ever good. I don't think hating anybody on the basis of race is ever good. It's only this one group that does it.
I'd like to believe, and I hope that I'm right, that it's a minority within the Western world that really believes this stuff.
I think.
But they have significant power and influence.
Boy, do they.
They are the editors of newspapers. They are the prime ministers. They are professors at universities and so forth. And those are the people who's promoting this type of idea. When I think most hardworking, ordinary people don't fall for this.
Certainly most authentic Christians reject it out of hand immediately.
Yeah. It's essentially anti-Christian in many ways.
Well, it is the definition of anti-Christian, I think. I mean, that's look, what do I know? Don't take theology advice from me, but that's certainly my truest, deepest belief that this is immoral, no matter who it's done to.
Yep.
So I should have said this at the outset, but one of the reasons there's been this real change in people's willingness in the West to talk about what's happening in South Africa in an honest way, not with the false pieties of Desmond Tutu was so great. Whatever Desmond, you think of Desmond Tutu, not much. But we were required to talk about South Africa in a very specific way and to repeat certain cliches at gunpoint. And that's changed in the past couple of months. And it's really changed due to a South African emigre called Elon Musk. This is my perspective. You tell me yours. But he has made it possible through X, but also through statements he's made on X, to say the obvious, which is this is a crime against a beleaguered minority, and this is racism against human beings, and it's wrong. What do you feel that?
Yes. So I don't know how much of what is in his biography by Isaacson is true, but it does seem from his biography that he's had some bad experiences growing up in South Africa, which is unfortunate. And we're still not sure quite how attached he still is to South Africa as a country, but looking at his X and his comments, it's very clear that he's interested. And the strange thing is, even though some people are very angry with him for speaking about South Africa, the only thing that he's really doing is he's picking up a mirror and he's saying, look at what's happening in South Africa. And he's retweeting videos from rallies in South Africa. And
exactly.
He's literally just saying to people, look at this stuff that's happening in South Africa.
Yeah, what do you think of this? Are you okay with this?
No,
do you defend this?
I think, a lot of people I think are. I can speak for a lot of people in saying that we're really, really grateful for what Elon Musk is doing to shed light on what is happening in South Africa.
It must be so weird to live in a country that has received so much attention from Western media, so much attention. I mean, there's no other country in Africa where your average American knows the name of 3 famous people. You know what I mean? There's not even close. Name 3 famous people from, Congo. No, but every American knows about Nelson Mandela, probably Winnie Mandela, Desmond Tutu.
Jan Smuts was also very big, who became this Boer general who was a advisor to Churchill.
Joined the English in the First World War,
Yes, First and Second World War.
Right, but the First World War was, not even 15 years after the Boer War. So that was a pretty remarkable decision that he made. I don't think most people are that in tune, but they know the big outlines, but of what happened post-94, and they know all about apartheid and all that. But it must be so weird to be living in this country where all this stuff is happening and nobody is saying anything about it.
Yeah, it's crazy. It really is. And I have to say, the last few months has been quite a ride in terms of what the executive order signed by President Trump and statements coming from the US.
To tell us about that executive order, if you don't mind.
So the executive order is a very strong reprimanding of what the South African government is doing. It says that the South African government is, well, as Trump said, is treating certain sections of society very badly, and and
Sorry, that's
and that the
pardon me, I
US
have a cold. That's the Trumpiest thing ever said.
And the US will not stand for this, and so it boils down to sanctions in an important way, which is not. On one part of it says that they will grant refugee status to Afrikaners if they want to go to the US. Which I don't think, in all fairness, we're really grateful for the public stance taken by the US. And in a certain sense, they haven't gone far enough. But in a certain sense, I don't think the granting of refugee status is much of a solution. Some people will take that up. But that's why I told you the story of the Battle of Blood River and the vow. We are culturally very, very attached to South Africa. And so
I think your family got to South Africa around the time my family got to the United States. And this is
hundreds of years.
This is my country.
I think I'm ninth generation. And so
I also have a mother of English descent, and I'm also, unlike you, I'm ashamed of it. Sorry, just kidding. Sort of, not really. But yeah, no, of course. I mean, it's your country. I mean, what at that point, what you know?
So I think what a better response from the US could be is to take a firm stance against what is happening in terms of what the South African government is doing, but then to say how can the US support minority groups in South Africa who are really working for some form of self-determination. I think America should recognize that it does have part in the problem in terms of what happened historically.
Are you kidding? Yes, it does. Big time.
Yes, and therefore it's reasonable, and I think it's fair, and I'm hesitant to say this because I'm not an American, but I think it's reasonable to say that America has some form of a moral responsibility. Not to fix South Africa, but at least to try to rework this mess that has been created, because it was involved in creating this mess.
We've mobilized our State Department to defend, quote, trans rights in the Donbass, okay? We've waded into every sectarian conflict in this world for the past 80 years. Yeah, I think we can certainly say that a minority group targeted for genocide in a country we've been involved in really intimately for my entire life, that group has a right not to be killed and to have some measure of self-determination. I think we can do that.
Yeah.
That's not too big a
Absolutely,
deal,
yes.
right?
Yeah, and the solution, I would say the most sustainable solution is to help such communities to govern themselves, to have self-determination. And it's not only obviously it would be in our interest, but I think it's also in the interest of the West and of America.
Just on principle, like every other group in the world has the right to its own homeland except white people. Like what?
Yeah.
Like just explain to me how that makes sense. Either no group has the right or every group has the right.
Yep.
It's really that simple. And if you want to say no group has the right, okay. You might even convince me. I don't know. I'm not a race guy, actually, by my temperament at all. I'd kind of like to ignore it. But as long as some groups have a right to self-determination, then every group has a right.
Yep.
It's that simple.
Yes.
And if there's a special carve-out where one group doesn't have a right, you have to explain to me why that group doesn't have that right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Is that fair?
No, it's absolutely fair. Well, I think South Africa is a...
What? I mean, what the hell why are we playing along with this nonsense?
Yeah, it's this narrative has become this massive stream that is turned into rapids on a river that just pulls everyone along. And this narrative just says if you're white, then there's inherently something wrong with you.
It doesn't make any sense, and it's leading toward a really bad conclusion, obviously, as it has for every other group targeted in this way has really suffered in and there are a lot of them, okay? It's not, there are a lot of them.
Yep.
And it never ends up well. And I just don't know why we're playing along where you're not even allowed to say, oh, you haven't been. I don't care anymore, obviously. But again, either every group has a right to self-determination or no group does. You can't have this system where, some groups do or all groups do but one. No. It's all or nothing on this.
Yeah, well, I can guarantee...
Tell me how I'm wrong.
No. Well, I can guarantee you that when I get back home, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble for this interview.
Well, I don't know why, though. I mean, like, what's the counter argument? I don't really get it. Like, what is the counter argument? There's only one group on the entire face of the planet that doesn't have the right that every other group has. Like, tell me how.
It's
no,
really
I mean, like,
bizarre.
maybe there's a good answer. I'm waiting for it.
No, well, we don't know what the answer is.
So there is no answer, and so because there is no answer, the way that uniformity is maintained is just through threats. Like, shut up.
Yep.
You're a bad person for saying that. You're a Nazi. It's like, no. I hate the Nazis. I'm going to speak for myself. I hate the Nazis.
Of course.
I hate the idea that people are attacked for something they can't control, like how they're born,
Yep.
their genetics. I just don't believe in that.
Absolutely.
I never will. I'm a Christian. I don't believe in it. So you can call me whatever you want. I'm actually making the opposite case, and I haven't done anything to be ashamed of. And if defending the right of people not to be murdered because of how they were born is a crime, then I'll plead to it.
Yep.
But I actually think that the only thing the people currently in charge of most of the world, certainly of the West, are good at is seizing the moral high ground.
Mm.
And they don't deserve it. They haven't earned it. They're rotten. Their ideas are rotten, and they don't deserve to lecture the rest of us about our moral inferiority while they're endorsing the murder of people for how they were born.
Yep.
Sorry.
It's a house of cards. Yeah. So
What is a house of cards? That's exactly right.
yeah, it's built and it's a very shining house of cards, and it's very proud of its accomplishments, but it's not sustainable. So South Africa has been a victim of Western imperialism
I'm aware,
in many
yes.
ways, and ideologically currently, it's ideological imperialism, but also, and this is interesting, the ANC that's governing South Africa today was founded just after the unionization of South Africa in 1910. And they said that this was one of the major triggers that sparked us to start this movement. And the unionization was after the Boer War. Before the union, South Africa was a variety of different republics and colonies
Yes.
governing themselves. And unionization effectively meant that all of these different subsidiary authorities were combined into one big South Africa as we know it today. The borders of South Africa were actually drawn pretty much by the British in 1910. And the ANC were vehemently
They have a
opposed.
long history of border drawing,
Yes.
I notice. Yeah.
You see this when you have these completely
Oh,
straight borders, and that's artificial. But and so the borders we have for South Africa today was a product of Western imperialism, and now those in power would very much like to maintain these borders because they have control. And so if we are truly anti-colonialism and anti-imperialist, we should return to a position where people govern themselves. We should rethink the borders.
You'll never be allowed to do that. I mean, let's just cut right to the no BS part of this. That will not be allowed. It's never been allowed. You will need either to get to force, which I pray you don't, because I hate that. I hate killing. Or you will need the assistance of a powerful outside force that makes it happen. That's just a fact. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, I think it's fair to say. I mean,
Right? So anyone who says, I want to kill you, kill the Boer, you're subhuman, those are not people who are going to say, yeah, go ahead and create your own independent state and not bother anybody, because you're going to be way more successful and prosperous than they are, and they're going to hate you on the basis of envy, of course. That's already happening.
and we have to ask them nicely to make certain concessions
Right.
towards
No, I
us.
get it's not going to happen. So what is your plan?
Well, I think the plan is to firstly to be well organized communities, to have a very strong sense of community, a sense of pride in who we are, to remain Christian, and have a strong faith, strong family ties, and so forth. That's where it starts. And then, other than that, the second step, you might say, the plan is to just create certain realities on ground level. So it's one thing to say, we want more authority or more self-determination, but you have to, in a sense, create that so that what you have created can be recognized. There's no point in saying, well, you guys can have your own place, but that place doesn't exist. So I think what the Afrikaner people need to do is to a large extent build their own self-determination, and I think that's what we intend to do. But it would help a lot if we can get recognition for this pursuit as a legitimate pursuit.
So you don't think, I sort of just didn't ask you to pause, and I should have. You began this segment of the conversation by saying the current scheme, the current arrangement is not going to work.
Yep.
I think most people, certainly I as an outsider, instinctively kind of want it to work.
Well, it's a good story. It sounds like
It's a good story. Yeah, it is. I mean, I'll admit to being kind of a dopey liberal in some ways. I really prefer the idea of, people living together in harmony. I just feel that way. I can't help it. Maybe that's my Enlightenment legacy or something. I also think you should deal with reality, and I definitely don't think you should be allowed to kill people because of the way they look, period. So, by the way, how did these people, why did they go on TV like they're on the right side? They're like endorsing genocide. Like, I don't understand how they've been allowed to get away with being on Winnie Mandela's side and feeling self-righteous. I just don't get that. I think it's disgusting. But whatever, I said that 5 times. I can't say it enough. But how do you know it won't work? Like, ANC obviously is a criminal gang, totally incompetent. You don't have electricity a lot of the time. Like, it's not working.
Yep.
They're just stealing everything. Got it. Stealing the copper out of the wires. But there's not another political coalition that could run it effectively?
No. So you mentioned electricity. In Johannesburg, the mayor just a few days ago announced that people should just wait 7 days and then they will have water. So it's not just an electricity problem. There's a water problem
So
as
there's
well.
a water problem.
So-
You're going to have a food problem at some point.
Well, if the farmers are targeted, yes. So there are many reasons why it's not working and why it won't work. And well, everything you can think of points to that direction. One is just the data. As I said, like you can look at the levels of how crime is increasing, how unemployment is increasing, how government service delivery is increasingly failing, everything. I honestly, how health is deteriorating, everything except tax collection. That's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is just the extent to which people in South Africa are turning their back on politics. There's this political vacuum in South Africa, and you can see it, for example, with the extent to which people have stopped voting, how voters' turnout has dropped significantly in elections. People just aren't interested. They vote reluctantly, those who do. So that's one aspect of
Interesting.
it.
Why do you think that? Because they feel hopeless?
Because they feel the political establishment is completely disconnected. They don't. It doesn't resonate with them. They don't. People vote for parties even though they don't really like them. But they think this is, of all the parties, I don't like any of them, but this one is the least bad, so I'll vote for that one. So there's a complete disconnect between the politicians or the political elite in South Africa, even the opposition parties and the people. And so there's this political vacuum that has developed. And this vacuum is filled, as my friend Ernst van Zyl in South Africa says, either by the good guys or the bad guys. It's filled by the bad guys in terms of organized crime. So we have these mafias and gangs coming to the fore with significant power, and to such an extent that the government is afraid of them. Or it can be
Boy,
filled...
that is the story globally, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it is.
The drug cartels are one of the most powerful governments in the world, and they're not even in government.
It's incredible. Yeah. So we have a construction mafia, for example. If you build a shopping center, the construction mafia turns up and they tell you need to employ our people or else we're going to sabotage your building and stuff like that. And it's a regular thing.
And you can't fight them.
No, you can't. You can't fight them. But the vacuum can be filled by the good guys, and that's well-organized communities who take control of what is important to them. And so the future is and that's what analysts and scenario analysts and so forth have been saying, that the future is one of deterioration, where you will have communities who will be much worse off than they are today because of the bad guys filling the void, and you might have flourishing communities because of good guys filling the void. And so that's another reason, but I think the most important fundamental underlying reason why it's not sustainable is it's a political system that is detached from the reality in South Africa. The reality is the distance from Cape Town, the south, to the north of South Africa is the distance from Rome to London. So it's a big country, number one, but it's not homogenous by any means. It's very diverse. There's 11 official languages.
Right. It's not just to restate, it's not just black and white at all.
No, it's certainly not. There's this Indian community, there's what we call colored community in South Africa, and there are various different tribes, you could say, or cultural communities among black South Africans and among white South Africans. So it's very diverse, different languages, different cultures. There's and now we have this political system that just says you have individual rights. And in some ways, the Constitution, even though it was very much celebrated when it was adopted, it was called the best Constitution in the world and the most liberal, most democratic, and so forth. The Constitution says...
It guarantees everything, but you get nothing.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. So we have what they call third generation rights, first, second, and third. It's a very vast network of rights that you have in theory. But then the question is, so there's this idea that the highest authority is the Constitution. But it's not possible for a written document to have the highest authority. The highest authority is with the person who gets to interpret it. So
Boy, is that true, isn't it?
So, for example, Section 25 of the Constitution in South Africa, which the government is trying to change, it's a private property rights clause. They want to change it. But currently it says the government can expropriate your property if it's in the public interest. Now, if you ask me as a Westerner, when is it in public interest to expropriate property? It would be something like they have to build a big highway, or maybe there's a military emergency or something like that. If you ask a judge who is founded in this ideology we've just spoken of, they would say it's in the public interest for white people not to own land. So it's a question of interpretation. You can have a wonderful document, but it boils down to how do you interpret it. And that's why I'm saying it's not compatible with realities on ground level. And and there've been many lawfare in South Africa, many. South Africa is a very good example of political court cases, and we've won many and we've lost many. But it's a ship that is sinking. That's the fact.
Well, and it all seems fake. I mean, it seems like, and again, one of the reasons I'm so fascinated by your country is I think it's on a trajectory that I recognize as an American. So you have these legacy institutions that sort of go through the kabuki of dispensing justice, but it's not justice, actually. It's totally disconnected from justice. It doesn't mean anything.
Yes.
Absolutely. And you have this constitution, which is beautiful, which is, ignored. The only power resides in the people who interpret it, as you said.
Yep.
And so then you reach kind of the end point, or the most recent end point, which is the idea that whites can't own land. Can you explain this?
Yes, so they have been trying to change the South African Constitution, the property rights clause, to empower the government to expropriate private property without compensation. That's the buzzword. It's
just steal the land.
Yeah. They call it EWC. It's expropriation without compensation, but it's confiscation of property. That's what it is.
Well, how is expropriation without compensation different from stealing?
No, exactly. But
it's just shoplifting.
But it's flabbergasting to see the extent to which, again, academics and analysts and journalists are rushing to the defense of the South African government.
In South Africa there?
Yes. So here's one of the many bizarre things that they would say. They would say, this is all a lie. You guys are lying. It's not expropriation without compensation. It's expropriation with compensation, but compensation can be nil. So it can be zero compensation.
So it's not happening, but it's a good thing that it is.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly
always,
it.
As always, right.
And so the president has just signed the expropriation bill in South Africa, which is now,
He signed it.
Yeah. So there's still an attempt to change the constitution, and there's now a new bill in process. It was just announced, I think, a week ago that they want to pass through Parliament that says that 80% that's what it boils down to, that 80% of land or property in South Africa must be owned by black people. So, because it says it must be racially representative. And so I want to tell you a quick story about this because it sort of highlights the ideology. I was at a land summit in South Africa, and a spokesperson for the Department of Land Reform spoke. And it was very clear from his speech that the problem is white people owning land. It was a racial thing. It was very clear. But it's colored with words like restitution and correcting historic injustices and so forth. And so I asked him at this summit, I said, here's an example. And what would the government's position be on this? The example is a white guy owns a farm. The government takes it from him to correct historic injustices. And they give it to a black guy. And it's a black farmer. And maybe a year or two down the line, this black farmer decides he doesn't want to be a farmer anymore. He wants to sell his land. And the buyer is white. And now there's a white farmer again. What's the government's position on this? And the spokesperson for the department says, in that case, the correction of the injustice has been reversed. It's completely bizarre.
What's interesting is we've seen this exact movie, frame by frame, right next door in Zimbabwe, formerly Rhodesia, which was one of the most prosperous countries in Africa, one of the big tobacco producers in Africa.
It's very sad what happened to that country.
Well, it's shocking. Very but it's like organized government-sponsored racism doesn't work. And I don't care how often the New York Times defends it. It's always the same. And that is like right next door to you. And you have a refugee crisis in your country because of it. And
well, our government, our ruling
So what do they say to that?
No, they say that Robert Mugabe is a hero and that ZANU-PF, the party,
his party,
is a good party and it's a liberation force and we respect them.
Okay, so again, no one wants to use the term, but this is genocide. I mean, that's what that is. It's like targeting a group of people for extinction, elimination on the basis of immutable characteristics. Like, I don't know is there another genocide definition I'm not aware of?
Well, I think you can say there are threats of that happening. There's not a genocide happening in South Africa.
No, I'm not saying there is. I'm saying that's where it's going. Like, what's the other end point here?
Well, yes.
You're not human. You can't own land. You should be killed. What am I
Yes,
missing?
and yeah, if you own land, by definition, that's illegitimate, regardless of whether you bought the land. It doesn't matter how you got the land. The fact
Because
that you
of
are-
your race.
Because of your race, yes.
Okay. If we can't say that's wrong, then anyone who can't say that's wrong, anyone who makes excuses for that is a dangerous person. I don't know what else to say. Put another group in there. I don't care what group it is.
So the ANC in South Africa wanted to, they have this process of name changes. And by the way, this targeting of statues came from South Africa. It's happening in America. It started in South Africa, burning down statues and so forth. So, and they've had this long process of name changes. And one thing they wanted to change the street in which the US Embassy is in South Africa to Fidel Castro Avenue. That's one story. The other one is they wanted to change one of the main streets in Pretoria to name it after Mao Zedong. And then some of the opposition parties said, are you crazy? Do you know what Mao Zedong did? And the response was, remember, Mao was never convicted of any crime. So,
Can I say, it does seem not only like one of the worst governments in the world, but one of the dumbest also.
well, I think there's some explanation as to why the South African government has gone so off the rails. And it's that they've gotten a free pass for decades.
Yeah, that's right.
Because of this narrative. They could do and say whatever they want. They got no criticism or very little criticism or very careful criticism. And that's why I think they've gone so ballistic after the recent comments by Trump and people like Elon Musk and so.
Oh, have they? I'm sorry, I don't follow it that closely. Have they? Those comments were noticed in South Africa?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's the biggest story in South Africa at the moment.
Really? And what are they saying?
Well, they're saying that the organizations that I was involved with at the time have committed treason. That we've been charged for treason.
You've been charged with treason?
Yeah.
For what?
For speaking, well, among others, for me speaking with you about what's happening.
That's treason?
In South Africa. Yeah, because it's bad mouthing your country. That's the argument.
Damn.
So I don't know if it was this one of the opposition parties who.
I wanted to go
charges.
to Cape Town for Christmas just on vacation. I didn't have time in the end, but
you'll have to put
probably
on shades.
Probably shouldn't go. Is that what you're saying?
No, you should come to South Africa. No, you should definitely come.
Funny.
I don't know if there's much will come from the treason charges, but that's certainly.
But you've been charged with treason.
Yeah, they were official complaints filed at the police. Yes.
What's the penalty for treason in South Africa?
It would be imprisonment. We don't have the death. We don't have the death penalty.
No, they just necklace you. It's informal.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm honestly, seriously, I'm more concerned if the question is about safety, about mob justice in South Africa than the actual government coming after you.
Of course. So what does that look like?
Well, I think you reported on this in 2021, I think, when there was this massive riots in South Africa. When they just...
In Durban.
And then
I remember that.
Yeah, it sort of spilled out to Gauteng, to Johannesburg to a lesser extent. And it's just people, it's almost like, smelling blood and becoming extremely violent and so forth. And then people join in by the thousands.
I've seen that with my own eyes a couple of times.
Yeah,
it's really scary.
So a friend from Europe once asked me, are you not afraid that the government's going to come to your house and take your stuff? And my honest answer is not that much. I'm more concerned about a mob showing up at my house.
So then what do you do?
Well, if you are alone, you can't do anything. If you're a well-functioning, well-organized community, then the community, you can call people on the radio, you can get the community to take a stance. And I think that's one of the
So you don't get lynched?
Yes.
You got a lot of lynchings and stuff. I mean, that's, again, add it to the irony file. I mean, South Africa is like the world capital of lynching.
Yes.
Oh, I noticed. Yeah.
It's not so much white people who are targeted.
I'm aware. No, of blacks.
Yeah. That certainly. It has happened in the previous dispensation. It's still happening to an extent, not as much as in the past, but people don't know that it's still happening.
To people accused of crimes. And
it's partly due to the fact that the police is absent.
Right.
So especially in townships, someone is a rapist and the police doesn't show up, doesn't do anything, and then the local community just deals with him. That type of thing happens in South Africa.
In a very brutal way.
Yes. Yeah, it does happen in a brutal way.
Yeah. I've noticed. Like pretty shocking, like almost like I wouldn't want to describe it.
Yeah.
On
Yeah, I mentioned the necklace murders before. So we have that. And it's the same with the xenophobic violence. It's very unfortunate. And if we had a well-functioning police service, maybe that would have helped, but we don't. So in South Africa, we can check the numbers. I'm pretty sure the private security sphere in South Africa is almost as big as private security in America but America is much larger. Private security in South Africa is more than double the police and the army combined. If you add the police and the army up together and you multiply it by 2, private security is the amount of private security officers in South Africa or security guards is
Do you have the right of self-defense, the right to defend yourself and your family in South Africa?
We do have the right to self-defense. We can own firearms, although it's not as easy as in America.
Yes.
But you can do that. And you can get arms, especially through a private security company. There's some room to make sure that you can protect yourself.
And does it work?
Yes. In terms of the farm murders, we've seen that statistically, that in areas or communities where people are well organized, where they have radios, where they drive patrols, where they are trained, there's a decrease in farm murders. You can clearly see that. Actually, in the last few years, the farm murder numbers have come down a bit, and it's not because the incitement has gotten better. It's not because the police is more efficient. It's because local communities have become much more involved with their own safety. And so that's certainly one of the most important building blocks of the solution.
So what, now that the president, I'm using air quotes again around president, I mean, the whole system is fake, obviously. It doesn't affect justice. It doesn't improve the lives of its citizens. It's in no sense illegitimate government. And by the way, it's not the only illegitimate government in the world. But anyway, what happens when the government tries to put this law into effect, to try to act on it? The government shows up at your house, says, you can't, you've lived in the same plot for 100 years. You can't have it because you're white. We're taking it. Like, do people comply?
No, people won't comply. No, that's partly why I told this story at the beginning, is the Afrikaner people and the farmers are very stubborn. This, in Afrikaans, we say hardkoppig or hard-headed. So this idea...
Well, farmers, you have to be stubborn to be a farmer in the first place.
Yes, and especially
Why
farmer
aren't you in
South
private
Africa.
equity? I mean, It's easier.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a common trope among farmers to say that I would rather die on my farm than to hand it over to the government. And so I think if they really try to act on it, which they haven't tried, there are land invasions in South Africa, but it's not so much the government, it's mobs and gangs and so forth invading people's land. But if they really try to act on these attempts at expropriation, there's going to be a massive backlash. And there's no doubt. So what they would say is, this is actually what the government says, that we need to do what happened in Zimbabwe, but without violence. But that's how they would argue it. And
They actually say we need to do what happened in Zimbabwe?
Yeah. But this time without violence.
That's one of the worst crimes of my lifetime.
Yeah, well, they say it publicly. Yeah, you can find it online. And so the argument is, but we're going to do it a bit better. We're going to do it without violence. But what that means is we're going to do what happened in Zimbabwe and you are not going to resist. That's what it means. But obviously people will resist when they try to do that. There's no doubt about it. But I do think the government is very incompetent. They have these very radical ideas. I don't know if they have the competency to actually go through with these
That's
ideas.
the upside. I lived in Washington, D.C. almost my whole life. And that was absolutely true there. The local government make all these threatening noises, do this, do that, do the other thing. It's against the law to do this, whatever. And you just kind of people just ignored it. And
so there are some business organizations in South Africa who now use the term maximum appropriate non-compliance. That's what they encourage private companies to do. So it's a form of civil disobedience. It's with all these BEE, that's these black empowerment laws. To just say, we're just not going to comply.
I know someone who had a thriving business he built himself in South Africa, and the government showed up and said, you're handing half your business to your new partner who didn't do anything. It would just show up and collect the money. And it's just they stole half his business. Because it's all theft. I mean, it doesn't... I noticed that black South Africans haven't gotten richer in the last 30 years.
No. And the government owns the land, most of the land that they expropriate. They don't give it to people. It goes to the government.
So what if you were to say, no, how about no? You have no legitimacy and you haven't been here any longer than I've been here. And you have, and I have guns too. So I'm not participating. How's that?
Yeah. Well, civil disobedience can be a wonderful thing. And we've had some examples of successful civil disobedience campaigns in South Africa where the government had this, they call it the e-toll system. It's like a big tax system on the highways that it's an electronic tax toll system but people just by the thousands, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands just refused to comply, to get the tags and so forth. And eventually they had to stop it because even though it was law, people just didn't do it. And the same with COVID. COVID was a good example. We've had a bizarre COVID. I mean, everyone has had a bizarre COVID. So we had these strange laws like you can't buy flip-flops during COVID.
Yeah, those are deadly.
Yeah, and you cannot buy shorts. And stuff. You cannot buy cooked chicken. We had these really, really bizarre COVID laws. It's a crime to buy cooked chicken or to sell cooked chicken during COVID. And so people just said, well, we don't care. We're just going to do what we want. And so there was a massive civil disobedience phenomenon in South Africa during the COVID lockdown. And so I think people have learned, and the government couldn't do anything about it. I think people have learned that that you can actually do a lot if you just don't comply with these completely ridiculous, irrational laws.
That sounds, I mean, I don't live in South Africa, but again, I have lived in Washington, D.C., so that sounds totally right to me. I wonder, though, about what you said when we first started talking about this, about the mob justice. That does sound scary to me.
I think that's a bigger threat.
What do you do about that? How do you live in a country where, like your neighbors could rise up against you?
Yeah, so we've had some examples of this. It started with the Rhodes Must Fall movement. It was the
Rhodes. Oh, Cecil Rhodes.
Cecil John Rhodes, yeah. So this one guy defecated on Cecil John Rhodes' statue at, was it UCT? What university was it? In Cape Town. And then they started this movement.
He defecated on it.
Yeah.
That's attractive. Well, that's kind of like the level, actually, that you're dealing with, yeah.
And so they
shit on it.
They started this movement of tearing down statues, which eventually boiled over to America, and that's how it got to America. It started and it boiled out over to Europe and so forth. But it started with that, this targeting of statues. I think it was 2012 or something. It was maybe before that even. And it became a mob. And they wore T-shirts with slogans like "Kill the Whites," like on the T-shirt. And it became very violent and very overtly racist. And it was students running around just, setting things on fire, burning down buildings and stuff like that. So that is a real threat. And then later we had the Fees Must Fall movement. That was university students demanding that education must be free. You shouldn't pay to go to university. And it was the same thing. And now more recently we've had political parties sort of taken up that thing, this Kill the Boer and so forth. And so I honestly think in South Africa, the threat of mob violence is a bigger threat than the government.
Of course it is. Of course it is. And, that's where you get killed in situations like that, I think. So what do you have to be pretty well organized, pretty well armed.
Well, the thing is there's no silver bullet. There's no one thing that we can do to make sure that we're equipped to withstand that. But if there is a silver bullet, it would be, or the closest to it, it would be what I mentioned earlier, is well-organized communities that have a sense of community, that recognize that you have a sense of responsibility, not just towards yourself and your own family, but towards your community, and that you have some form of a communal identity that is under threat, that is being targeted, and you have to protect yourself. You have to fulfill a bunch of functions that the government is not fulfilling. Even though you're paying them to do it, they're not doing it. So you have to look after your own safety. You need to have a gun. You need to have a bulletproof vest. You need to have, or if you don't, then at least a significant amount of people in your community must, especially those who are more interested in this type of thing. You need to be well organized. You need to be prepared if something bad happens in your community. If the mob comes, if they set the shopping mall on fire, or if they come for people's houses, that in a very short time frame, you can get a whole bunch of people mobilized to protect their community. And with these riots in 2021, that was a good case study because some communities were completely unprepared and they were virtually destroyed. And some communities were very well prepared. And when the mobs arrived, there was a bunch of people with guns waiting for them.
I saw a video of the South Asian communities in Durban, the big South Asian, big Indian community there. And I don't know if this is represented, but the videos I saw, man, they were not putting up with it at all.
Yeah, they were very well armed. Yes. Yeah.
It was like some heroic Indians out there.
Yeah, there was one, I think, some guy with something that looked like a minigun on the back of a pickup truck. I don't know where they got that, but
I don't know.
But that's an example. There was another
Is that
example.
true? These videos are all out of context. I'm not in Durban during this, but I just
That's true.
You got some brave Indians.
Yes, we do. We have some brave Indians. We do. But there were other examples. One was the mob was approaching a town and the people were waiting for them on a bridge. And then they got there, they just couldn't enter because the people had just cordoned off their own town, their own village or community, and they weren't able to enter. So we've had some case studies of this. South Africa is a fascinating case study for a lot of things.
It certainly is. It certainly is. Can I just ask like a dumb question, a childish question? Why, if I'm the government of South Africa, it's like, why are you going after productive people for one thing? The most productive, and that would include the Indians, the Afrikaners. By the way, some of the Black African immigrants,
yes.
the Zimbabweans, these are some of the most productive people. I'm like, why not just live in harmony, actually? Wouldn't it be better for everybody?
Of course it would be better. I think it's because when they took power in 1994, they explicitly said, we are not a political party. We are not a government in terms of what people think a government should be. We are a liberation movement committed to the promotion of socialism and committed to the promotion of black nationalism. And that's their ideology.
They said that in 94.
Yeah, they even said that before 94. They published it.
So it's just, I know I'm going back to the same themes. I'm getting older, sorry. But I mean, I actually did know that because, as I said, I've always been interested and I knew people there. But nobody in the American press mentioned that. Not one person.
Yeah. There's a well-known book that was an international bestseller, My Traitor's Heart, by a guy called Rian Malan. It's sort of his autobiography.
I've read it.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so there's one section in that book. I know Rian. I know the author. He's a great guy. But in the book, he writes about...
he's in English. I don't know if he wrote it in Afrikaans originally, but it's a beautifully written book.
It's very well written.
He's a very nice writer.
He speaks like he writes as well.
Oh, he does?
Yeah. So there's one part in the book where he talks about picking up the New York Times. And I'm sort of saying this from memory, from reading the book. But broadly speaking, what he says is he picks up the New York Times in, 1992 or something in New York or wherever. And there's two stories next on the same page. The one is about the ANC and Nelson Mandela coming to save South Africa. And then the other story is a somewhat smaller story about a guy being necklaced in a local community, a guy being viciously attacked and killed. And so he writes in that book that what concerned him was that the New York Times was not able to connect these two stories to each other.
Yes.
They didn't recognize that it's part of the same story. It's presented as two completely different stories.
I think they knew exactly. I think it was very obvious. So I was 25 in 1994, and it was very obvious to me. And I don't think I have any special powers of insight. I think you would have to be lying to yourself or lying to your audience not to acknowledge it. Mm. And by the way, it's 1994, that's less than 20 years after the Khmer Rouge took power in Phnom Penh in Cambodia.
That was while the Rwandan genocide was happening.
It was the same year as the Rwandan. It was later that year.
So it was the same month even. The election at least.
Was in July?
May.
Okay,
2004.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember them both very well, and I knew people in both places at the time.
Yep.
But I remember thinking, obviously, what happened in Kigali is in Rwanda is way worse than anything that's happened in South Africa, thank God. But bottom line, when bad people with bad motives, stated publicly, take power, it's not good. So, I don't know. That's not hard.
Well, there's a story from Rwanda that I keep mentioning in the same time. I think Linda Malvern wrote a book called Conspiracy to Murder, which is about, I think she lived in Rwanda and she's a journalist and she wrote about what happened. And she writes about a meeting, or it must have been a party in Washington between American diplomats and government officials from Rwanda in the run-up, I think, to the genocide. And it was just a big celebration and everyone was happy because Rwanda was in the process of becoming a democracy. And then afterwards, someone asked one of the Americans, but did you not know what was happening in Rwanda, that they were on the verge of committing genocide? And he said, the American diplomat said, yes, we knew, but we were so excited about democracy and Rwanda becoming a democracy. We didn't want to spoil the mood by confronting them.
Well, that sounds like an American diplomat.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's...
So that's very, very alarming, this idea of being so excited about a potential idea that you are not willing to confront the realities that's happening or that could potentially unfold.
Or being unwilling to clearly define your terms. Like, what is democracy actually?
Yeah, well, I think that's an underlying.
It's an underlying problem.
Yeah.
Right. It's a problem that's only surfaced in this country.
Can I give you an example of that from the South African perspective? So I mentioned the name changes. It's a big thing in South Africa.
I'm sure that'll fix your problems. Will that bring the electricity and water back?
No, obviously. So there's a town called Amanzimtoti, which is on the east coast of South Africa. The main street was named Kingsway. They changed it to Andrew Zondo Street. Now, Andrew Zondo is really only known for one thing. He was a member of the ANC Youth League, and I believe it was 1985. He planted a bomb in a shopping center, and he killed, I think, 5 people and injured 40. All of the people who were killed were women and children. That's the only thing he did, and he was a member of the ANC Youth League. The ANC regards that event as something that they claim as an act of heroism. So they named the main street after him. And so there are people in that town who drive to work in a street named after the person who killed their children. And now they would say that they need to do these name changes to make sure that they get rid of offensive names. Offensive names are Afrikaans names, names linked to South Africa's past. And so I was at a summit where this was discussed. And I mentioned this. I said, so you say that in Pretoria, Church Street is an offensive name and has to be changed. In Amanzimtoti, you change Kingsway to Andrew Zondo. And I tell this story. And I said, so who decides if it's offensive or not? And the guy said, oh, well, that's easy. The majority decides. But it's not even the majority. It's just the government. The government decides because they believe they are the majority. So we have these extremely offensive things happening under the banner of
they're murderous. I mean, again, I think the picture is really, really clear. You know, it couldn't be clearer.
Yeah, so absolutely.
You're staying?
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, we'll stay.
You guys must love your country.
Yeah, we really do. I mean, in South Africa, everyone who's been to South Africa would say it's an incredibly beautiful country, and it truly is. And it's a country that unfortunately has suffered so much under this current government and has suffered so much in the past. One of our Afrikaans philosophers, a man named N.P. van Wyk Louw, wrote, I think in the 1930s or something, that you love a people not so much for their accomplishments as for the hardships that they've had to endure.
That's right.
And I think that's true for South Africa. South Africa has endured many hardships, and also for our people, the Afrikaner people, as with many other peoples all over the world, have endured many hardships. And it's through these hardships and maintaining our sense of identity that we really love our history and our tradition and our culture.
You came in the first place because you were an oppressed minority, correct?
Yep.
I know the French did.
Yes, the French Huguenots, yes.
Yeah.
It was fleeing the religious wars in Europe.
Of course, they were getting killed.
Yes, in big numbers. Yeah. That's part of our origin story.
It's also factually true.
Yeah,
it's part of history. I mean, it's not a myth; it's real.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, do you think? I don't know what the resolution will be, and I'm certainly rooting for all South Africans of every color, but fervently. But I gotta think that being able to say certain obvious truths out loud helps.
Yes.
Do you think?
Well, the problem is if you do that, you get bashed quite aggressively.
But compared to what?
Yeah, no.
They just said we're taking your land because your skin color.
Well, the alternative is worse. It's just living the lie. It's much worse than getting bashed for telling the truth. Can I tell you a quick story or a quick reference about courage?
Of course.
So it's somewhat philosophical, but I'll make it practical. So Odysseus is on his way back from the Trojan War, and he has all these hardships, and he's trying to get home. And he gets told that the only way for him to get home is to face Scylla and Charybdis. Scylla is this 6-headed sea monster, and Charybdis is a monstrous whirlpool that swallows ships whole. And the only way for him to get home is he has to navigate through these two monsters, which he eventually does. He decides it's better for him to sail his ship closer to Scylla, the sea monster, than the whirlpool. And a whole lot of his people die, but he reaches his destination. And so Aristotle writes about this in the Nicomachean Ethics. And when he talks about the golden mean, and he says any virtue is about finding the balance between having excess of it and having a deficiency of it. And so this goes to courage. And courage is a good example. If you have excess courage, you become reckless.
Yes.
And if you have a deficiency, then you're a coward. And so the point of having courage is finding the balance between cowardice and recklessness. And what's great about the story of Odysseus is Odysseus discovers that he cannot simply go exactly in the middle between the two. He has to be closer to the one threat than to the other. Because if he goes too close to the whirlpool, his whole ship gets swallowed up. And so the point here, and Aristotle says this as well, it's not to find the exact middle point, it's to find the appropriate balance between the two extremes. And so the one extreme is recklessness and the other extreme is cowardice. And I honestly think in the situation we are in, it's better to err on the side of being too bold than to err on the side of having not enough courage or trying to find some form of solution through appeasement. And so we make mistakes in the process, and you know, sometimes you say something wrong or you do something wrong. But I'm very much convinced that if we're on this course and we try to pursue what we are trying to pursue, rather err on the side of having too much boldness and too much courage and facing the consequences than having to face the consequences of having a lack of courage.
I love that. I got to say, in a lifetime of travel, if I could just generalize, the two most impressive groups I meet everywhere, my whole life, around the world, both groups living in exile in large numbers, are the South Africans and the Lebanese.
Oh, really?
Yes. I've never met one of either group I didn't like and didn't admire. I don't think I've met one in either group. And the thing that they have in common is they live in beautiful, volatile countries that they really love, but they're very hard to live in.
Yes.
And so they're caught between that tension, you know, cowardice and recklessness, and they're making that calculation every single day, and they're living so thoughtfully and so purposefully and in such a, I don't know, just a admirable, noble way. I've just noticed that.
I appreciate the comment.
It's just an observation, but I've thought about it many times. Last question: where can people who have made it this far into the interview and are interested in what's happening in your country and happening to your group, how can they follow it? How can they be helpful? How can they learn more and be supportive?
Well, I think there are many ways. The one way is just to follow what's happening in South Africa and speak about it.
Yes.
Because we've had this incredible barrage of communications coming, just telling us again how wrong we are. You know, this narrative is this zeitgeist in a certain sense. It's really like a monster that you have to fight. That you're not allowed to speak certain truths, even though the truths are self-evident. So I think one thing is if people just can help spread the message, take some interest in South Africa, because what's happening in South Africa is also of interest to the rest of the world.
I think it is.
In many ways, South Africa is the future of the Western world.
I know.
In terms of the problem and the solution, I think. So that's one. And then the other is there really are some institutions in South Africa who are really focused on building community-based solutions. And I think if people can identify these institutions and support these institutions, it really would help. And I think in terms of the US government, if the US government is willing to do something, as it seems that they are, I think the most important thing that they could do is a combination of pressuring the South African government away from these destructive policies, but also supporting communities, local communities or minority communities or nations, you should say, who are committed to finding some form of self-determination.
Amen. Well, Godspeed. I hope to see you again. I hope you'll come back.
Oh, thank you. I hope so too. And I have to thank you for not just for this interview, but also for the focus you've been putting on South Africa in the past. It was
it's just so interesting, and it reveals so much about us. I'm American, and it reveals a lot about our leadership class, and I think it's important to say it. So,
yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
So it turns out that YouTube is suppressing this show. On one level, that's not surprising. That's what they do. But on another level, it's shocking. With everything that's going on in the world right now, all the change taking place in our economy and our politics, with the wars we're on the cusp of fighting right now, Google has decided you should have less information rather than more. And that is totally wrong. It's immoral. What can you do about it? Well, we could whine about it. That's a waste of time. We're not in charge of Google. Or we could find a way around it, a way that you could actually get information that is true, not intentionally deceptive. The way to do that on YouTube, we think, is to subscribe to our channel. Subscribe. Hit the little bell icon to be notified when we upload and share this video. That way you'll have a much higher chance of hearing actual news and information. So we hope that you'll do that.